close your eyes and imagine a time when the world was young, when gods walked among mortals and magic flowed through every mountain stream and whispering wind. In ancient Greece, storytellers gathered around flickering fires to share tales that would echo through eternity, stories of love and betrayal, of heroes facing impossible odds, and of divine beings whose emotions could reshape the very fabric of reality. These weren't just stories. They were explanations for everything mysterious in the world. Why does winter come? Why do we dream? What lies beyond death's door? Tonight, let these timeless tales carry you into peaceful slumber, as we journey through a realm where anything is possible and every star in the sky has a story to tell. Welcome to the enchanted world of Greek mythology. 1. Zeus's birth cave was a divine secret operation. Deep within the rugged peaks of Mount Aegean in Crete, there lies a cave that once witnessed the most important birth in all of divine history. Picture, if you will, the Titaness Rhea, her heart pounding with fear as she clutches her newborn son close to her chest. Her husband Cronus has already devoured 5 of their children, swallowing them whole the moment they drew their first breath. But this child, this golden-haired baby with eyes like storm clouds, he will be different. The cave itself seemed to understand the sacred moment unfolding within its stone embrace. From its deepest chambers emerged sacred bees, their wings shimmering with divine light as they approached the infant Zeus. These weren't ordinary bees, but creatures touched by magic, and they became his first nurses, feeding him honey that sparkled with celestial power. Outside the cave, young warriors called the Curetes took their positions. They raised their bronze shields and spears, clashing them together in thunderous rhythm that echoed across the mountains. Each crash of metal on metal masked the baby's cries, ensuring that Cronus would never discover his hiding place. Years later, when thieves dared to steal honey from this sacred cave, they found Zeus's swaddling clothes still hanging in the chamber. Upon seeing these divine relics, their bronze armor split and fell from their trembling bodies, for they had glimpsed evidence of the king of gods himself. 2. Hera's marriage to Zeus began as an elaborate deception. In the golden halls of Mount Olympus, a love story was about to unfold that would begin with deception and endure through countless ages. Zeus had been pursuing the radiant Hera for months, showering her with gifts of ambrosia and nectar, composing poetry that made the muses weep with envy, and painting the sunset sky in her favorite shades of rose and gold. Yet Hera, wise and proud, rejected every advance. Perhaps her divine intuition warned her of the heartbreak that lay ahead. Or maybe she simply enjoyed watching the king of gods humble himself before her beauty. Growing desperate, Zeus devised a plan that would appeal to Hera's greatest strength, her compassionate heart. He waited for the most violent storm to lash Mount Olympus, when lightning split the sky and thunder shook the very foundations of heaven. Then, transforming himself into a small, bedraggled cuckoo, he allowed the wind and rain to batter his tiny form until his feathers were sodden and his body shivered with cold. When Hera discovered the pitiful bird struggling against the storm, her heart melted instantly. She gathered the trembling creature in her gentle hands, pressing it close to her warm breast to shelter it from the tempest. At that tender moment, when her guard was completely down, Zeus resumed his true form and embraced her. Embarrassed by the intimate deception, Hera agreed to marry him to restore her honor. Thus began the most famous and tumultuous marriage in all mythology. 3. Athena's birth created the first divine headache. The birth of Athena began with what might be called the worst headache in the history of the universe, suffered by none other than Zeus himself. These weren't ordinary headaches that could be cured with rest or divine nectar. Inside Zeus's skull, his first wife Metis continued to live and work even after he had swallowed her whole. You see, Zeus had learned of a prophecy that Metis would bear a son destined to overthrow him. So in a moment of panic, He had opened his mouth wide and swallowed the Titaness before she could give birth. But Métis was far too clever to simply disappear. Within the darkness of Zeus's mind, she set up a divine forge and began her greatest work. Day and night, the sound of her hammer rang against her anvil as she crafted a complete set of armor and weapons for their unborn daughter. The heat of her divine fire warmed Zeus's thoughts, while the metallic ringing of bronze on bronze echoed through his consciousness. Zeus's screams of agony could be heard across all three realms: heaven, earth, and underworld. Mortals covered their ears and fled, while animals scattered in terror at the sound of their king's torment. Finally, unable to bear another moment of the pain, Zeus summoned Hephaestus with his great axe. When the god of the forge struck true, Athena burst forth, fully grown, fully armed, and letting loose such a mighty war cry that Mount Olympus trembled, announcing the birth of wisdom incarnate. For Poseidon's trident could anchor floating islands in the vast blue expanse of the Aegean Sea, where dolphins danced with sea nymphs and waves carried the songs of ancient magic. Poseidon's trident possessed powers that went far beyond stirring storms and shaking the earth. When the Titaness Leto found herself pregnant with Zeus's children, she wandered the world seeking a place to give birth. But Hera's jealous decree had reached every land and island. None dared offer sanctuary to Zeus's lover. Only one place showed any mercy: the small island of Delos. But there was a problem that seemed insurmountable. Delos was not an ordinary island. It drifted endlessly across the wine-dark sea, never staying in one place long enough for anything to take root or grow. How could Leto possibly give birth while the ground beneath her feet shifted and swayed with every current and tide? Poseidon, god of the seas and brother to Zeus, was moved by the pregnant Titaness' plight. He raised his mighty trident, forged by the Cyclopes from adamantine that gleamed like captured starlight, and struck the seabed with tremendous force. Massive chains of divine metal erupted from the ocean floor, wrapping around Delos like gentle but unbreakable embraces. The island suddenly stopped its endless wandering, anchored firmly in place for the first time in its existence. The water around it grew calm and clear, as if Poseidon himself was holding his breath. And there, on the now stable shores of Delos, Leto could finally rest and prepare for the momentous birth of Apollo and Artemis. 5. Apollo and Artemis's birth was a 9-day marathon on the rocky shores of the newly anchored island of Delos. A birth was taking place that would last 9 agonizing days and nights, making it the most prolonged labor in all of mythological history. Leto clutched the sacred palm tree, its silver bark smooth beneath her desperate grip as wave after wave of contractions washed over her. But something was terribly wrong. Hours passed, then days, and still her children would not come. The Titaness knew she was caught in the web of Hera's vengeance. Far away on Mount Olympus, the queen of the gods had enacted her cruelest punishment yet. She had kidnapped Eileithyia, the goddess whose very presence was necessary for any birth to occur successfully. Hidden away in Zeus's palace, Eileithyia sat bound hand and foot, unable to answer Leto's desperate prayers for help. For 9 days, Leto suffered on the windswept shores. Dolphins gathered in the waters nearby, their mournful songs echoing her pain. The other goddesses watched from afar, their hearts breaking with sympathy, but none daring to challenge Hera directly. Finally, they devised a secret plan, pooling their treasures. They created a necklace of pure gold and amber, 9 yards long and gleaming like captured sunlight. This magnificent bribe was offered to Eileithyia, who could not resist such beauty. The moment the birth goddess arrived on Delos, Artemis emerged into the world, and in the most beautiful twist of fate, the newborn goddess immediately turned to help her mother, serving as midwife for her twin brother Apollo's birth just moments later. 6. Aphrodite's birth foam had divine properties. From the foam-crowned waves of the Mediterranean, where the severed essence of heaven had fallen into the eternal embrace of the sea, Something miraculous was taking form. The foam wasn't ordinary sea spray, but something alive with creative power. It shimmered with opalescent light, swirling and dancing as it gathered the scattered pieces of divine essence into something new and wonderful. Within this magical foam, Aphrodite was taking her first breath, her golden hair flowing like liquid sunlight as the waves carried her toward the shores of Cyprus. As the goddess of love drifted toward land, her very presence began to transform the world around her. The rocky coastline, which had been barren and gray for countless ages, suddenly burst into bloom. Roses unfurled their petals along the cliffs, their perfume so sweet it made the sea birds dizzy with delight. Myrtle bushes sprouted from cracks in the stone, while wild herbs carpeted the beach in fragrant green. When Aphrodite finally stepped on a dry land, tender grass sprang up beneath her feet with every step. The earth itself seemed to be welcoming its most beautiful daughter, creating a garden path wherever she walked. The sea behind her grew calm and clear, its waters taking on an iridescent quality that would be known forever after as Aphrodite's blessing. Even the creatures of land and sea were transformed by witnessing her birth. Dolphins gained more graceful movements. Seabirds developed sweeter songs, and flowers learned to bloom more beautifully just by breathing the air she had touched. 7. Ares was imprisoned in a bronze jar for 13 months, in the realm of divine warfare. Even the god of war himself was not invincible. Ares learned this lesson in the most humiliating way possible. Through 13 months of imprisonment that became the stuff of whispered legends among both gods and mortals. The story began with two giant brothers, Attis and Ephialtes, whose ambition knew no bounds. These sons of Poseidon had grown to enormous size, their heads touching the clouds while their feet remained planted on the earth. Drunk on their own power, they decided to storm Mount Olympus itself and claim it as their kingdom. During their assault on the divine realm, they encountered Ares rushing to defend his family's home. The god of war, confident in his divine strength and battle skills, charged the giants without hesitation. But the brothers had prepared for this moment, and their sheer size gave them an unexpected advantage. Working together, they overpowered the war god and stuffed him into a massive bronze jar, sealing it so tightly that not even divine strength could break free. For 13 agonizing months, Ares remained trapped in this cramped prison. His war cries echoed within the metal walls, growing weaker as his divine essence was slowly drained by the confinement. Although gods cannot die, they can suffer terribly when restrained or imprisoned. Ares grew pale and weak, his mighty frame diminished by the airless captivity. Meanwhile, the other Olympians searched frantically for their missing brother, following every lead and rumor. Finally, Hermes discovered the hidden jar and freed Ares under cover of darkness. The war god emerged humbled and weakened, a reminder that even divine power could be overcome by mortal cleverness. 8. Hephaestus created the world's first robots. Deep beneath Mount Etna, in a forge where divine fire burned hotter than any earthly flame, Hephaestus was crafting wonders that would not be matched until the modern age of technology. These weren't simple tools or weapons, but living beings made of pure gold that possessed consciousness and intelligence. Homer tells us these handmaidens wrought of gold had understanding in their hearts, voices sweet as honey, and strength that rivaled any mortal warrior. Picture them moving through the volcanic workshop, their golden skin gleaming in the firelight as they anticipated their master's every need. They organized his tools with perfect precision, assisted in complex metallurgical processes that required split-second timing, and even engaged in conversation with visitors to the forge. But perhaps most remarkable were his self-operating tripods, golden tables mounted on wheels that could think for themselves. These divine automatons would roll into the assembly hall of the gods, serving ambrosia and nectar to the Olympians, then return to the workshop without any commands or guidance. Hephaestus created these marvels partly out of necessity. His physical disability made movement through the vast forge difficult and painful. But with his golden servants to assist him, he could focus entirely on his craft. Yet they were also a demonstration of his unparalleled skill, proof that true artistry could breathe life into lifeless metal. These divine robots were powered not by gears or springs, but by the very essence of craftsmanship itself. Each one contained a spark of consciousness that allowed them to learn, adapt, and even show loyalty and affection toward their creator. 9. Demeter's search for Persephone created the first famine. When Demeter discovered that her beloved daughter had vanished without a trace, the goddess of the harvest descended into a grief so profound that it threatened to end all life on earth. Abandoning her duties, Demeter began a frantic search that took her to every corner of the world. She questioned every river, every tree, every blade of grass, but none could tell her what had become of sweet Persephone. As days turned to weeks, and weeks to months, the goddess's sorrow began to manifest in ways that horrified both gods and mortals. The golden wheat that had once waved like a sea of plenty across vast fields withered and turned to dust. Fruit trees stopped bearing their bounty, their branches becoming skeletal and bare. Even the wild grasses and flowers that carpeted meadows and hillsides began to yellow and die, leaving behind a landscape of brown desolation. Rivers started to run low, then dried to mere trickles, then disappeared entirely. The rich soil that had been the foundation of all agriculture turned to powder that blew away on every breeze. Farmers watched in horror as their carefully tended crops crumbled to nothing, regardless of how much water they carried or how desperately they prayed. As food stores dwindled, humans and animals faced starvation on a scale never before imagined. Entire cities emptied as people wandered in search of anything edible. The very foundation of civilization began to crumble. On Mount Olympus, Zeus realized that his sister's grief threatened the cosmic order itself. Without mortals to offer worship and sacrifice, the gods would lose much of their power and purpose. Something had to be done, and quickly, before Demeter's broken heart destroyed the world entirely. 10. Dionysus was literally twice born. In all the annals of divine births, none was more extraordinary than that of Dionysus, the god who entered the world not once, but twice, earning him a distinction that no other deity could claim. The story began with a beautiful mortal princess named Semele, whose radiant beauty caught the attention of Zeus himself. Their passionate affair soon resulted in pregnancy, but it also attracted the jealous notice of Hera, the queen of the gods. Never content to let her husband's infidelities go unpunished, devised a particularly cruel revenge. Disguising herself as an old nurse, Hera befriended the unsuspecting Semele and slowly planted seeds of doubt in her mind. If Zeus truly loves you, the disguised goddess whispered, why does he not appear to you in his full divine glory, as he does to me? Convinced by this false logic, Semele made Zeus promise to grant her one wish, and foolishly asked to see him as he truly was. Zeus, bound by his oath, appeared before her wreathed in lightning and thunder. The mortal woman was instantly incinerated by the divine fire. But Zeus, thinking quickly, rescued the 6-month-old fetus from her womb. In an act of unprecedented divine surgery, Zeus cut open his own thigh and placed the unborn child inside, sewing the wound closed with golden thread. For 3 more months, Dionysus continued to develop within his father's leg, nourished by divine ichor instead of mortal blood. When the time came for his second birth, Dionysus emerged fully formed from Zeus's thigh, making him the only god who could claim to be truly born from his father rather than his mother. 11. Hermes invented the world's first musical instrument as a baby, on the very day of his birth. While most divine infants were content to sleep and feed, the clever baby Hermes was already plotting his first great adventure. Born in a cave on Mount Cyllene, The newborn god gazed around his surroundings with eyes that sparkled with mischief and intelligence far beyond his apparent age. His divine mind was already working, calculating, planning something that would announce his arrival to the world in the most spectacular way possible. Crawling from his cradle, the infant god discovered a large tortoise sunning itself on a rock near the cave entrance. But where others might see a simple creature, Hermes saw potential. With hands that moved with impossible skill for one so young, he carefully removed the tortoise from its shell, transforming that curved dome into the foundation of something entirely new. Gathering reeds from a nearby stream and sinew from a passing cow, the baby god wove them together with the shell to create the world's first lyre. When he plucked the strings, the sound that emerged was so beautiful that it made the mountain itself seem to sigh with pleasure. But this was only the beginning of his day's adventures. Using his new instrument as both distraction and bargaining tool, Hermes would soon steal Apollo's sacred cattle, charm his way out of punishment, and earn his place among the Olympian gods, all before his first sunset. The lyre he created that day would become one of the most sacred symbols in Greek culture, proof that genius and creativity can emerge at any age. 12. Hera's revenge extended to future generations. Hera's jealousy was not a fleeting emotion that cooled with time, but a burning force that could stretch across generations, ensuring that the children and grandchildren of Zeus's lovers would suffer for their ancestors' perceived crimes. The most famous victim of this generational curse was Heracles, whose very name meant glory of Hera, a bitter irony that seemed to mock the goddess with every mention. From the moment of his birth, Hera's hatred followed him like a dark shadow that could never be escaped. When Heracles was still an infant sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Hera sent two enormous serpents slithering through the palace walls. Their scales gleamed like polished bronze in the moonlight as they coiled toward the nursery, their fangs dripping with venom that could kill a dozen men. But even as a baby, Heracles possessed strength that defied mortal understanding. He grasped the serpents by their necks and strangled them with his tiny hands, his laughter echoing through the halls as he played with what should have been instruments of his death. This was only the beginning. Throughout his life, Hera would drive him to madness, cause him to kill his own family in a fit of divine-induced rage, and force him to serve a cowardly king who assigned him 12 seemingly impossible labors. Even Heracles' descendants would feel Hera's wrath, as the goddess ensured that the hero's bloodline would be marked by tragedy and struggle for generations to come, proving that divine memory could be longer and more terrible than any mortal grudge. 13. Artemis never forgave slights against her purity. In the sacred groves where moonlight filtered through ancient oak leaves, Artemis reigned as the eternal virgin goddess whose purity was both her greatest strength and her most dangerous obsession. The young hunter Actaeon learned this lesson in the most terrifying way possible. He had been tracking a magnificent stag through the dense forest for hours, following its trail deeper into the wilderness than any mortal had ventured before. Exhausted and thirsty, he heard the sound of splashing water and pushed through a curtain of hanging vines to discover a crystal-clear pool. There, bathing in the sacred waters, was Artemis herself. Her silver hair flowed like liquid moonlight over her shoulders, while her skin glowed with divine radiance that made the pool seem dim by comparison. For a moment, Actaeon stood frozen, his mortal mind unable to process the incredible beauty before him. But that moment of wonder became his doom. Artemis's eyes met his, and in them he saw not embarrassment or fear, but cold fury that chilled his very soul. Without speaking a word, the goddess raised her hand, and Actaeon felt his body begin to change. His limbs stretched and elongated. His skin sprouted coarse brown fur, and magnificent antlers burst from his skull. Within seconds, the hunter had become a stag, identical to the one he had been pursuing. As he turned to flee, he heard the baying of his own hunting hounds, who no longer recognized their master's scent. The pack tore him apart, never knowing they had killed the man who had raised and trained them, while Artemis watched from her pool, unmoved by his screams. 14. Zeus's transformation powers extended to bizarre extremes. While Zeus's shape-shifting abilities were legendary throughout the ancient world, some of his transformations revealed a cunning that bordered on the disturbing, showing that the king of gods would stop at nothing to satisfy his desires. His pursuit of the huntress Callisto presented a particular challenge. As one of Artemis's devoted followers, Callisto had sworn an oath of eternal chastity and spent her days in the company of other virgin huntresses who would immediately report any male presence to their divine mistress. How could Zeus approach such a well-guarded target? His solution was as clever as it was deceptive. Knowing that Callisto trusted Artemis completely, Zeus transformed himself into the exact likeness of the virgin goddess. Every detail was perfect, from the silver bow slung across his shoulder to the short tunic that allowed for easy movement through the forest. When Artemis approached Callisto during a hunt, the young woman felt no alarm. She welcomed her beloved goddess with open arms, allowing Zeus to embrace her in what she believed was a gesture of divine affection. Only when it was too late did she realize the terrible truth of the deception. But perhaps his most shocking transformation involved his own daughter. When Zeus desired Persephone, who was closely guarded by her mother Demeter, he took the form of a serpent to reach her. This particular shape-shifting crossed boundaries that even the other gods found disturbing, proving that Zeus's appetites knew no limits of propriety or familial bonds. These transformations revealed the darker side of divine power, where might truly did make right, and even the closest relationships offered no protection from the king of God's desires. 15. The Eleusinian mysteries kept Demeter's greatest secrets for 2,000 years. In the small town of Eleusis, just outside the walls of ancient Athens, there existed a mystery cult so powerful and secretive that it successfully guarded its secrets for nearly 2,000 years. From around 1600 BCE until the rise of Christianity finally brought its practices to an end. The mysteries centered around the story of Demeter and Persephone. But what exactly happened during the secret initiation rites remains one of history's greatest puzzles. Thousands upon thousands of people were initiated into these mysteries, including some of the most famous figures of the ancient world: the philosopher Plato, the orator Cicero, the emperor Marcus Aurelius, even the playwright Aeschylus. Yet despite this enormous number of initiates, spanning nearly 2 millennia, not one person ever revealed the central secrets of what they experienced. The vow of silence was taken so seriously that violation was punishable by death, and the fear of divine retribution was so strong that even deathbed confessions were virtually unknown. What we do know is tantalizing in its mystery. Initiates spoke of experiencing something so profound that it completely eliminated their fear of death. They described visions of light so brilliant it burned away all darkness from their souls, and encounters with divine beings that transformed their understanding of life's meaning. The ceremonies involved fasting, purification rituals, and the drinking of a sacred potion called Kykeon. Some modern scholars believe this drink contained psychoactive compounds that induced religious visions, but the exact recipe died with the last of the mystery priests. Whatever happened in those sacred halls, it was powerful enough to sustain absolute secrecy for 2,000 years, making it one of the most successful secret societies in human history. 16. Hephaestus's lameness inspired the first assistive technology. Cast down from Mount Olympus as an infant because of his physical deformity, Hephaestus faced challenges that would have broken a lesser spirit. His legs were twisted and weak, making walking not just difficult, but agonizingly painful with every step he took across the rocky floors of his volcanic forge. But rather than accept limitation, the god of craftsmanship turned his disability into inspiration for innovations that were thousands of years ahead of their time. In the depths of his workshop beneath Mount Etna, where divine fire burned hotter than any earthly flame. Hephaestus began creating what might be called the first assistive technology in history. He forged golden leg braces that were works of art as much as medical devices. These weren't crude supports, but elegantly designed pieces that incorporated springs and joints to assist his movement. The metal was so finely wrought that it seemed to flow like liquid gold around his limbs, providing both strength and flexibility. But he didn't stop there. Recognizing that his mobility challenges made it difficult to move quickly around his vast workshop, Hephaestus created golden handmaidens, essentially divine robots, to serve as his assistants. These artificial beings could support his weight when needed, fetch tools from distant corners of the forge, and even carry him when his legs could no longer bear the strain. Perhaps most remarkably, he designed a special chariot pulled by mechanical horses that could transport him across any terrain. This divine wheelchair allowed him to travel between realms and attend gatherings on Mount Olympus, refusing to let his physical limitations exclude him from divine society. Through innovation and determination, Hephaestus proved that disability need not mean inability, becoming perhaps the most productive and creative of all the Olympian gods. 17. Apollo's oracle at Delphi may have been literally high. Perched high on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, the oracle at Delphi was the most sacred and mysterious place in the ancient Greek world, where mortals could receive prophecies directly from Apollo himself through his chosen priestess, the Pythia. For over 1,000 years, pilgrims traveled from across the Mediterranean to witness the extraordinary ritual. The Pythia would descend into the inner sanctum of Apollo's temple and seat herself on a golden tripod positioned over a fissure in the earth. There, breathing vapors that rose from the depths, she would enter a trance state and speak in riddles that were believed to contain divine wisdom. Ancient writers described the Pythia's behavior during these sessions. Her eyes would roll back, her body would convulse, and she would speak in voices that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond her mortal form. The priests of Apollo would then interpret her cryptic utterances, turning them into prophecies that would influence the fate of kingdoms. For centuries, scholars dismissed these accounts as religious superstition, but modern geological analysis has revealed something remarkable. The temple at Delphi sits directly over intersecting fault lines that release gases from deep within the earth. Scientists have identified ethylene, methane, and hydrogen sulfide seeping from the rocks, gases that can cause euphoric hallucinations, altered states of consciousness, and the exact type of behavior described in ancient accounts. The Pythia may have literally been high during her prophetic sessions, breathing natural psychoactive compounds that put her into a genuine trance state. This doesn't diminish the spiritual significance of her prophecies, but it does suggest that the ancient Greeks may have unknowingly discovered one of the world's first natural pharmacological aids to religious experience. 18. Aphrodite had a dark side as a war goddess. While most people know Aphrodite as the gentle goddess of love and beauty, floating on seashells and inspiring romantic poetry, there was another side to her divine nature that was far more fierce and terrible. In the warrior city of Sparta, where children learned to fight before they could properly walk, Aphrodite was worshipped under a very different title, Aphrodite Aria, which meant warlike Aphrodite. Here, she was not the soft goddess of romantic love, but the fierce deity who inspired the passionate fury that drove warriors into battle. Spartan soldiers would pray to her before combat, asking not for gentle affection, but for the burning desire to destroy their enemies. They understood that love and war were not opposites, but two sides of the same intense emotion that could drive mortals to extraordinary acts of both creation and destruction. This martial aspect of Aphrodite was reflected in her sacred animals. While doves and swans represented her gentler nature, she was also associated with vultures, carrion birds that fed on the aftermath of battle. These grim creatures were seen as her messengers, circling over battlefields to claim the souls of the fallen for her dark domain. Ancient art sometimes depicted this fearsome version of Aphrodite armed with spear and shield, her beautiful face set in lines of terrible determination. She wore armor that gleamed like polished silver, while her golden hair flowed like a war banner in the wind. This duality reflected the Greek understanding that love itself could be a form of warfare. That passion could drive people to fight as fiercely for their beloved as any soldier fought for his homeland, and that the goddess who inspired the deepest affections was also capable of inspiring the most devastating conflicts. 19. Hermes could navigate all three realms of existence. Among all the Olympian gods, only Hermes possessed the extraordinary privilege of moving freely between the three realms that made up the ancient Greek cosmos, the bright heights of Mount Olympus, the middle world where mortals lived and died, and the shadowy depths of the underworld where souls journeyed after death. This unique authorization came from Zeus himself, who recognized that his messenger son would need unlimited access to carry out his divine duties. But Hermes was more than just a postal service for the gods. He served as a psychopomp, a guide for souls making the transition from life to death. Picture the moment when a mortal's life comes to its end. As the last breath leaves their body, Hermes appears at their bedside, his winged sandals silent on the stone floor. He carries the caduceus, his golden staff entwined with two serpents, which has the power to ease the soul's separation from the flesh. With infinite gentleness, Hermes helps the newly departed spirit rise from its physical form. Many souls are confused and frightened by this transition, clinging to the familiar world they're leaving behind. But Hermes speaks to them in voices that sound like distant music, explaining what they must do and where they must go. He guides them down the long path that leads to the river Styx, where Charon waits with his ferry. Along the way, Hermes answers their questions about what lies ahead, offering comfort to those who fear judgment and encouragement to those who doubt their worthiness. This role made Hermes one of the most important and beloved gods in the Greek pantheon, for eventually every mortal would need his services, and his kindness during that final journey could make the difference between terror and peace. 20. The Olympians' family tree included several instances of divine cannibalism. The divine family tree of the Olympian gods was stained with acts of cannibalism that revealed the darker nature of divine power and the lengths to which gods would go to maintain their authority. The most infamous case was that of Cronus, who devoured each of his children the moment they were born. The Titan king had learned from a prophecy that one of his offspring would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his own father. Driven by paranoia and desperation, Cronus waited beside his wife Rhea during each birth, snatching the newborn infant and swallowing it whole before it could even cry. The sight of her husband consuming their children one by one drove Rhea to the edge of madness. She watched in horror as Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon all disappeared down their father's throat, their divine essence trapped within his stomach but still alive and growing. But Zeus escaped this fate through his mother's clever deception. When Rhea wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and presented it as her newborn son, Cronus swallowed it without examination, too consumed by his paranoid haste to notice the substitution. Years later, Zeus would force his father to vomit up his siblings, who emerged fully grown and ready for war. But the cycle of cannibalistic violence didn't end there. Zeus himself swallowed his first wife, Metis, when he learned she might bear a son destined to surpass him. These acts of divine cannibalism weren't mindless brutality, but calculated attempts to control destiny itself. The gods understood that prophecy could not be avoided, only redirected, and they were willing to consume their own children to maintain their power over fate. 21. Chaos as the first principle. In the very beginning, before stars learned to shine or planets found their paths through the cosmic dance, there was chaos. But this was not the destructive confusion that the word suggests to modern minds. It was something far more profound and mysterious. Chaos was the primordial void, a divine emptiness that stretched beyond all imagination. Picture not darkness, for darkness requires light to define it, but rather a state of pure potential where nothing existed, yet everything was possible. This was the cosmic womb from which all creation would eventually emerge. Hesiod described chaos as a gaping chasm, a divine opening in the fabric of nothingness itself. From this vast emptiness, the first conscious beings began to take shape through forces that mortals could never fully understand. These weren't created beings, but aspects of existence that simply willed themselves into being. From chaos came Erebus, the personification of deep darkness that would one day fill the spaces between stars. Beside him emerged Nyx, the goddess of night whose black wings would spread across the heavens to bring rest to weary mortals. These two primordial forces represented the necessary darkness that would give meaning to light, the emptiness that would give substance to form. 22. Gaia's parthenogenetic powers. From the formless void of chaos, the first solid reality took shape in the form of Gaia, the Earth Mother whose power to create life was so profound that she needed no partner to bring forth her children. Gaia was not simply the planet Earth as we understand it today, but the living embodiment of all fertile potential. Her body was the soil that would nourish countless generations. Her breath was the wind that would carry seeds across vast distances. And her heartbeat was the rhythm of seasons that would mark the passage of time. Through the mysterious process of parthenogenesis, virgin birth, Gaia willed her first children into existence. From her solitary dreams came Uranus, the vast star-spangled sky who would arch over her like a cosmic embrace. She also bore the Urea, the mighty mountain ranges whose peaks would touch the heavens, and Pontus, the primordial sea whose waves would cradle the shores of future continents. These weren't ordinary births requiring months of gestation. Gaia's children emerged fully formed from her divine essence, shaped by her will and given substance by her inexhaustible creative power. Through these acts of creation, Gaia established herself as the ultimate source of all life. 23. Oceanus and Tethys, the fertile waters of creation. Among the Titan children of Gaia and Uranus, none were more prolific or essential to the functioning of the cosmos than Oceanus and his sister wife Tethys, whose union created the watery foundation upon which all life would depend. Oceanus was not merely a god of water, but the personification of the great freshwater river that the ancient Greeks believed encircled the entire earth. This cosmic stream was the source of all rivers, springs, and wells, flowing in an endless circle around the edges of the world like a liquid boundary between the known and the unknowable. His wife Tethys was the goddess of the flow of fresh water itself, the divine force that sent streams cascading down mountainsides and springs bubbling up from hidden depths. Together, their fertility was so overwhelming that it threatened to flood the entire world with their offspring. From their union came 3,000 sons, the Potamoi, or river gods, each one responsible for a different waterway on earth. Their 3,000 daughters, the Oceanids, became the mothers of springs, the guardians of lakes, and the spirits of clouds and rain. Eventually, the cosmic fertility of Oceanus and Tethys became so overwhelming that they chose to divorce, preventing their endless procreation from drowning the world. 24. Hyperion and Theia, the celestial light bearers. In the realm of the Titans, none were more essential to the daily functioning of the cosmos than Hyperion and his radiant wife Theia, whose children would bring light and order to a world that had known only the darkness of primordial night. Hyperion, whose name meant "he who goes above," was the titan of celestial light and the art of observation. Ancient sources credit him as humanity's first astronomer, the divine being who taught mortals to read the movements of stars and predict the changing of seasons. He represented the pillar of the east, where dawn first breaks across the horizon to herald each new day. His wife Thea was the goddess of sight itself, the divine force that made vision possible and gave precious metals their gleaming shine. Her name meant divine, and she was associated with all things that caught and reflected light, gold and silver, crystals and gems, and the bright eyes of both gods and mortals. Together, this luminous couple produced 3 children who would become fundamental to all life on Earth. First came Helios, the sun god whose golden chariot would carry daylight across the sky. Next was born Selene, the moon goddess whose silver chariot would provide gentle illumination during dark hours. Finally came Eos, the rosy-fingered goddess of dawn who would herald each new day. 25. Nyx's power over even Zeus. Among all the primordial deities who emerged from the void of chaos, none commanded more respect or inspired more fear than Nyx, the goddess of night whose power was so absolute that even Zeus, king of gods, treated her with cautious reverence. Nyx was not simply the absence of light, but an active force of cosmic significance. As she spread her dark wings across the heavens, stars became visible like diamonds scattered on black velvet, and mortals were granted the gift of rest and dreams. Her chariot was drawn by black horses whose breath created the mists and shadows that followed in her wake. Her dwelling place was a palace carved from ebony and obsidian, located at the very edge of the world where day and night meet but never mingle. Here she lived with her many children, for Nyx had given birth to some of the most fundamental forces in existence: Hypnos, the gentle god of sleep; Thanatos, the inevitable specter of death; and the Oneiroi, who brought dreams to slumbering mortals. The most famous example of Zeus's deference to Nyx occurred during a conflict with his son Heracles. When Zeus prepared to punish Hypnos for helping Hera, the god of sleep fled to his mother's palace. Zeus followed in his rage, but when he saw Nyx standing protectively over her son, he stopped. Even the king of gods understood that some powers were older and more fundamental than his own. 26. The 10-year cosmic war. The Titanomachy was not a brief skirmish between divine forces, but a decade-long cosmic war that literally shook the foundations of reality and determined the fate of all existence. For 10 full years, the universe was divided between 2 mighty strongholds. Mount Othrys served as the fortress of the Titans, its peaks wreathed in storm clouds and defended by beings whose power had shaped the world since its birth. Across the cosmic battlefield stood Mount Olympus, where Zeus and his siblings had established their base, determined to overthrow the old order and claim dominion over heaven and earth. The war was not simply a conflict between generations, but a battle between different visions of how the cosmos should be governed. The Titans represented the ancient way, where power flowed from primordial forces and natural law. The Olympians championed a new order based on justice, wisdom, and the protection of mortals. Several Titans chose sides based on their own principles rather than family loyalty. Prometheus, the forward-thinking Titan whose name meant forethought, joined Zeus because he believed the younger gods would be better rulers. The turning point came when Zeus descended into the depths of Tartarus and freed the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires, whom Cronus had imprisoned in fear of their terrible power. 27. Atlas's true punishment. When artistic depictions show Atlas bearing the weight of the world on his shoulders, they perpetuate a misconception that has endured for over 2,000 years. The truth of his punishment was both more poetic and more terrible than simple physical burden. Atlas was condemned not to hold up the earth, but to bear the celestial spheres, the entire vault of heaven with all its stars, constellations, and cosmic mechanisms. Classical art consistently shows him supporting a great sphere marked with celestial symbols, not the terrestrial globe that Renaissance artists mistakenly popularized. This punishment was specifically designed to match his crime, as the military leader of the Titans during their war against the Olympians. Atlas had commanded vast armies and orchestrated strategies that prolonged the conflict for a full decade. His tactical brilliance had nearly given the Titans victory, making him personally responsible for much of the suffering the war had caused. Zeus could have simply imprisoned Atlas in Tartarus alongside his brothers. But the king of gods chose a more symbolic punishment. The weight was not merely physical, but spiritual. Every star Atlas held represented a divine light that he could see but never reach. Every constellation told stories of a new world the Olympians were creating, a world in which he could never participate. 28. Prometheus's complex relationship with Zeus. The relationship between Prometheus and Zeus represents one of mythology's most complex tales of loyalty, betrayal, and the price of challenging divine authority. Made all the more tragic because it began with genuine friendship and mutual respect. During the Titanomachy, when brother fought brother and the cosmos trembled with divine warfare, Prometheus made a choice that shocked both sides of the conflict. Despite being born a Titan, he turned against his own family and provided crucial strategic advice to Zeus and the Olympians. Prometheus possessed the gift of foresight, and he could see that the younger gods represented the future while the Titans clung to an ancient past that could not be preserved. His counsel helped Zeus plan the military campaigns that ultimately won the war, and his knowledge of Titan weaknesses proved invaluable in securing victory. In gratitude, Zeus welcomed Prometheus as a trusted advisor and friend. For years after the war, the Titans served faithfully, helping to establish the new cosmic order and advising on matters of divine law and mortal affairs. But their friendship began to fracture over a fundamental disagreement about humanity's place in the world. Zeus viewed mortals as amusing pets at best, disposable creatures whose suffering meant little in the grand scheme of divine politics. Prometheus, however, had developed a deep affection for humanity and believed they deserved better treatment. 29. The eagle and liver, symbol of eternal regeneration. The eagle that tormented Prometheus each day was no ordinary bird of prey, but Zeus's personal eagle, a creature of divine origin whose presence added layers of symbolic meaning to an already terrible punishment. This magnificent bird, with wings that spanned the breadth of storm clouds and eyes that burned like golden fire, served as Zeus's most trusted messenger and the living symbol of his absolute authority. By sending his own sacred animal to torture Prometheus, Zeus made the punishment deeply personal, as if he himself visited daily to inflict pain upon his former friend. The choice of the liver as the target of this torture was equally symbolic. Ancient Greeks believed the liver was the seat of all emotions, particularly the passionate feelings that drove humans to great acts of love, courage, and defiance. By having it torn away each day, Zeus was essentially attacking the very essence of what made Prometheus care so deeply about humanity. But the liver's ability to regenerate each night ensured that the punishment would truly be eternal. Every dawn brought fresh tissue for the eagle to devour. Every sunset allowed healing that would make the next day's agony possible. This cycle of destruction and renewal reflected the Greek understanding of time itself. Endless repetition without hope of escape. 30. Kronos' golden age. Despite his horrific practice of devouring his own children, Kronos' reign over the cosmos was remembered throughout Greek history as the Golden Age, a time of peace and plenty that mortals would forever after regard with nostalgic longing. During this paradoxical period, humanity lived in a state that could only be described as earthly paradise. There was no need for hard labor, for the earth spontaneously produced everything mortals required for comfortable life. Grain grew wild in the fields without plowing or planting. Fruit trees bore their bounty year-round, and honey flowed from oak trees like sweet springs. War was unknown, not because of any enforced peace, but because there was simply nothing worth fighting over. With abundance everywhere, Territorial disputes became meaningless. Disease and premature death were rare, and those who did pass away did so gently, like falling asleep after a long and satisfying day. The climate itself seemed blessed during Kronos' rule. Harsh winters never came, nor did scorching summers that withered crops and made life miserable. Instead, the world enjoyed eternal spring, with gentle rains and warm sunshine that made every day perfect for whatever activities mortals chose to pursue. The irony was not lost on ancient Greeks that their greatest monster king had also been their most benevolent ruler. 31. The Four Pillars of Heaven. In the cosmic architecture of the ancient world, four mighty titans served as the living pillars that held heaven and earth apart, preventing the sky from crashing down and destroying all life in a catastrophic collapse. These weren't metaphorical supports, but actual divine beings whose bodies formed the cardinal points of the cosmic compass. Hyperion held up the eastern pillar, where dawn broke each day and light first entered the world. His brother Iapetus supported the western pillar, where the sun set each evening and darkness began its nightly reign. In the north stood Ceus, whose name meant questioning and who represented the intellectual axis around which the heavens turned. His pillar was associated with the pole star and the constellations that never set, making him the patron of navigation and astronomy. The southern pillar was maintained by Crius, whose name meant the ram, and who controlled the seasonal winds that brought weather changes throughout the year. His position made him responsible for the storms that swept up from the southern seas and the gentle breezes that carried spring northward. These four brothers had volunteered for this cosmic duty during the castration of their father Uranus. The arrangement worked so well that even after Zeus's victory in the Titanomachy, he chose to leave the four pillars in place rather than risk cosmic catastrophe. 32. Tartarus, both place and deity. In the deepest foundations of Greek cosmology, there existed a being so ancient and fundamental that he served simultaneously as both a conscious deity and the most terrible prison in all existence, embodying the principle that some punishments were literally built into the structure of reality itself. Tartarus, the deity, was one of the first beings to emerge from primordial chaos, a conscious force of imprisonment and cosmic justice whose very thoughts became the walls and chains that would hold the universe's greatest criminals. His realm lay so far beneath the ordinary underworld that Homer described it taking 9 full days for a bronze anvil to fall from the surface of the earth to its lowest depths. As a place, Tartarus was surrounded by walls of bronze that gleamed dully in the eternal twilight, their surfaces inscribed with the names of every crime that had ever been committed against divine law. The gates were guarded by the Hecatonchires, 100-handed giants whose strength could crush mountains, ensuring that none who entered could ever escape. But Tartarus was more than just a prison. It was the cosmic balance point where abstract concepts took physical form. Here dwelt Nyx, night, and Hemera, day, who passed each other twice daily at the bronze threshold but never met. The deity Tartarus felt every footstep of every prisoner in his realm, experienced their suffering as his own thoughts, and grew stronger with each act of cosmic justice. 33. Themis and Mnemosyne, divine law and memory. Among Zeus's many wives, none were more essential to the proper functioning of the cosmos than Themis and Mnemosyne, whose divine gifts became the foundation of both justice and culture in the world of gods and mortals. Themis, whose name literally meant divine law, was the Titaness who personified the natural order that governed all relationships between gods, mortals, and the natural world. She was not law as mortals understood it, written rules that could be changed or ignored, but the fundamental principles that made civilized society possible. When Zeus took her as his second wife, their union produced 6 daughters who would shape the experience of time itself. The 3 Ori, seasons or hours, brought order to the natural world, ensuring that spring followed winter, that day followed night, and that all things happened in their proper sequence. The three Moirai, fates, were even more fundamental to existence. Clotho spun the thread of each person's life. Lachesis measured its length, and Atropos cut it when the time came for death. Not even Zeus could override their decisions, for they represented destiny itself. Mnemosyne, the Titaness of memory, served a different but equally crucial function. When Zeus courted her, their relationship lasted 9 consecutive nights, a sacred period that resulted in the birth of the 9 muses exactly 1 year later. These daughters became the inspiration for all human arts and sciences, preserving the knowledge and culture that separated civilization from chaos. 34. Ceus and Phoebe, intelligence and prophetic wisdom. In the northern reaches of the cosmic pillars, where the pole star marked the center of the turning heavens, stood Ceus, the titan whose name meant questioning and who represented the divine gift of intellectual curiosity that would drive all future learning and discovery. Ceus was more than just intelligent. He was the personification of inquiry itself, the divine force that prompted both gods and mortals to ask why and how, and what if his position as the northern pillar made him the axis around which the heavens turned, symbolizing his role as the fixed point of reference that made navigation and astronomy possible. His wife Phoebe, whose name meant bright or pure, was the original prophetic goddess who first established the oracle at Delphi. Long before Apollo claimed the sacred site, Phoebe had spoken prophecies from the same mystical fissure in the earth, her silver voice carrying divine wisdom to mortals brave enough to seek it. Together, this intellectual couple produced 2 daughters who would profoundly influence the next generation of gods. Leto, gentle and nurturing, would become the mother of Apollo and Artemis after her affair with Zeus. Their other daughter, Asteria, inherited her parents' mystical gifts most completely, becoming the goddess of astrology and nocturnal prophecy. Through their children and grandchildren, Ceus and Phoebe ensured that intellectual curiosity and prophetic wisdom would continue to illuminate the world. 35. Iapetus, father of humanity's greatest benefactors, standing guard at the western pillar of heaven, where the sun completed its daily journey and darkness began to reclaim the world. Iapetus served as more than just a cosmic support beam. He became the patriarch of a family line that would produce both humanity's greatest champions and its most terrible burdens. Iapetus, whose name may have meant the piercer or the thruster, represented the force that drives action and change in the world. His position in the West associated him with endings and transitions, making him the patron of those who dared to challenge established order and create something new. When he married the Oceanid Clymene, their union produced 4 sons whose names would echo through every generation of human history. Atlas, the eldest, would become the eternal bearer of the heavens, his strength ensuring that the cosmos remained stable. Prometheus, the forward thinker, would steal fire from the gods and give mortals the gift of civilization. Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought, represented the tendency to act first and consider consequences later, a trait that would lead him to accept Pandora as his bride, unknowingly unleashing suffering upon the world. The 4th son, Menoetius, inherited his father's rebellious nature but lacked the wisdom to channel it constructively. Through these 4 sons, Iapetus' legacy touched every aspect of human existence, from the cosmic forces that kept the world stable to the divine gifts that made civilization possible. 36. The mysterious titan Perses. Among the children of Crius and Eurybia, none was more paradoxical than Perses, the titan whose very name meant the destroyer or the ravager, yet who was simultaneously described by Hesiod as being preeminent among all men in wisdom. This apparent contradiction revealed one of the deepest truths about the ancient Greek understanding of cosmic forces, that destruction and wisdom were not opposites, but complementary aspects of the same fundamental principle. Perses represented the necessity of breaking down old structures to make room for new growth. The wisdom that recognized when things had outlived their purpose and needed to be swept away. His marriage to the star goddess Asteria, daughter of Ceus and Phoebe, produced one of the most powerful and complex deities in the entire Greek pantheon, Hecate, the goddess of magic, crossroads, and the liminal spaces between life and death. Hecate inherited her father's destructive wisdom, becoming the deity who taught mortals that some problems could only be solved by tearing them down to their foundations and rebuilding from scratch. She was the goddess of transformation, not the gentle kind that gradually improved existing conditions, but the radical change that completely remade reality. Perses himself was associated with specific constellations and star patterns, particularly those that appeared during times of seasonal transition when the old year died and the new one was born. 37. Crius and his stellar dynasty. In the southern reaches of the cosmic architecture, where seasonal winds originated and the constellations of the southern sky wheeled through their eternal dance, Crius held his position as one of the four pillars of heaven, while simultaneously founding a dynasty that would control many of the most fundamental forces in the universe. Crius, whose name meant the ram, and who was associated with the constellation Aries, represented the divine force of breakthrough and renewal that came with each spring season. His position as the southern pillar made him the patron of the warm winds that melted winter's grip and brought life back to the frozen earth. His marriage to Eurybia, daughter of the primordial sea gods Gaia and Pontus, united the forces of sky and sea in a union that would produce three sons whose influence extended across every aspect of cosmic operation. Astraeus, the eldest, became the god of stars and winds, controlling the celestial mechanics that guided both navigation and weather patterns. Pallas, the second son, became the god of warcraft and the art of battle, representing the intelligent application of force. The youngest son, Perses, inherited his father's association with stellar cycles, but focused specifically on the destructive forces that cleared away the old to make room for the new. Through these three powerful sons, Crius established a divine dynasty that controlled the stars, the winds, the arts of war, and the forces of cosmic renewal. 38. The intermarriage patterns of divine families. The complex web of marriages within the Titan generation followed patterns that were not random romantic choices, but carefully orchestrated cosmic necessities, designed to ensure that the fundamental forces of the universe remained in proper balance and harmony. The most important of these unions paired complementary cosmic principles to create stable relationships that could withstand the pressures of ruling the universe. Oceanus married his sister Tethys, uniting the flowing waters of rivers with the nurturing moisture of springs and clouds. Hyperion's marriage to Theia paired celestial light with divine vision, their union producing the sun, moon, and dawn that would regulate time and illuminate the world. Ceus and Phoebe united intellectual curiosity with prophetic wisdom, their children becoming the sources of divine knowledge and mystical insight. But perhaps most significantly, Kronos married his sister Rhea, combining the force of time itself with the nurturing power of motherhood. These sibling marriages weren't considered incestuous by divine standards because the Titans represented fundamental forces rather than ordinary people. Their unions were cosmic events that created new possibilities for existence, like combining chemical elements to form new compounds with properties that neither possessed alone. The pattern established by the Titans continued through later generations, ensuring that divine power remained concentrated within bloodlines that had proven their ability to handle cosmic responsibility. 39. The survival of Titan goddesses. When Zeus achieved final victory in the Titanomachy and cast judgment upon the defeated Titans, a curious pattern emerged that revealed much about ancient Greek attitudes toward gender, power, and the nature of divine justice itself. while the male Titans, Kronos, Atlas, Prometheus, and their brothers faced imprisonment, exile, or eternal punishment. The female Titans largely escaped such harsh fates, instead finding ways to integrate themselves into the new Olympian order that Zeus was establishing. This was not because the Titanesses had been less involved in the war, but because Zeus recognized their unique value in building and maintaining his new cosmic kingdom. Themis, the embodiment of divine law, became his second wife and advisor, helping to establish the legal foundations that would govern both gods and mortals. Mnemosyne, the personification of memory, was courted by Zeus for 9 consecutive nights, their union producing the 9 muses who would preserve and inspire all human culture and knowledge. Leto, daughter of the intellectual titans Ceus and Phoebe, became the mother of Apollo and Artemis, 2 of the most important Olympian deities. By incorporating the Titanesses into his new order rather than punishing them, Zeus demonstrated the kind of wisdom that would allow his reign to endure, showing that true strength sometimes lay in knowing when to show mercy rather than justice. 40. Kronos' paranoid methods. The lengths to which Kronos went to prevent the prophecy of his overthrow revealed a mind consumed by paranoia, driving him to acts so desperate and horrific that they ultimately ensured the very fate he sought to avoid. The prophecy itself was both clear and terrifying. One of his children would rise up to overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his own father Uranus. But prophecies, as the Titans well knew, were statements of inevitable fate rather than warnings that could be heeded and avoided. Kronos' solution was as brutal as it was simple. He would devour each child the moment it was born, keeping their divine essence trapped within his own body where they could never grow strong enough to challenge him. With each birth, Kronos waited beside his wife Rhea like a predator, snatching the newborn infant before it could even draw its first breath. The horror of watching her children disappear one by one drove Rhea to the edge of madness. But it also inspired the clever deception that would save her youngest son. When Zeus was born, she wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and presented it to her husband in the darkness of their chamber. Kronos, too consumed by paranoid haste to examine his supposed meal carefully, swallowed the stone without hesitation. This moment of careless urgency proved that his fear had overwhelmed his wisdom, making him vulnerable to exactly the kind of trick a more careful ruler would have detected. 41. The true meaning behind Heracles' name. The greatest hero in all of Greek mythology bore a name that was both a cosmic joke and a profound statement about the nature of divine justice. For Heracles literally meant glory of Hera, the very goddess who spent his entire life trying to destroy him. This ironic naming was not accidental, but represented one of the deepest paradoxes in Greek thought. The idea that our greatest enemies often become the source of our greatest achievements. Every trial that Hera sent to crush Heracles only made him stronger. Every monster she unleashed only added to his legend. Every moment of suffering she inflicted only increased the glory that would make his name immortal. The name was given to him at birth by mortal parents who had no idea of the divine drama surrounding their son's conception. His original name was Alcides, meaning descendant of Alcaeus, a perfectly respectable name for the son of a Theban princess. But when the oracle at Delphi revealed his true destiny, she proclaimed that he would become the glory of Hera, whether the goddess willed it or not. From the moment Hera learned of this prophecy, she set out to prove it wrong, sending serpents to strangle him in his cradle, driving him to madness that caused him to kill his own family, and forcing him into servitude to perform 12 seemingly impossible labors. The deeper meaning of his name revealed itself over time. Hera's persecution forced Heracles to develop strength, courage, and endurance far beyond what any mortal or even most gods possessed. In the end, Heracles truly did become the glory of Hera, not despite her opposition, but because of it. 42. The hidden symbolism of Heracles' 12 labors. The 12 labors of Heracles were far more than random tasks assigned by a cowardly king. They represented a carefully structured spiritual journey that transformed a guilt-ridden madman into the greatest hero in mythology, encoding ancient wisdom about the path from mortality to immortality. The labors were divided into 2 distinct phases, each containing 6 challenges that corresponded to different stages of heroic development. The first 6 labors took place in the Peloponnese, the familiar world of Greek civilization, where Heracles faced monsters that represented earthly challenges and mortal limitations. The Nemean lion, with its impenetrable hide, taught him that some problems could not be solved through conventional means. He had to learn to use the creature's own claws to skin it. The Lernaean hydra, whose heads multiplied when cut off, showed him that some challenges require assistance from others. His nephew Iolaus helped cauterize the stumps to prevent regeneration. But the second 6 labors took him to distant, otherworldly places that existed at the edges of mortal geography. He journeyed to the land of the Amazons, the realm of the 3-bodied giant Geryon, and even descended into the underworld itself to capture Cerberus. Ancient Stoic philosophers interpreted each labor symbolically. The Augean stables, cleaned by diverting rivers, represented the need to redirect natural forces rather than fighting them directly. The final labor, capturing Cerberus without weapons, required Heracles to overcome death itself through pure strength of will, proving that he had transcended mortal limitations and achieved a form of divinity. 43. Perseus and the origin of the word clue. In the winding corridors of the labyrinth beneath Crete, where the monstrous Minotaur waited in darkness to devour human sacrifices, a simple ball of thread would become the inspiration for one of our most common words, showing how ancient myths continue to shape our language in ways we rarely recognize. When the Athenian prince Theseus volunteered to be one of the 7 young men and 7 young women sent as tribute to King Minos, he was walking into what seemed like certain death. The labyrinth had been designed by the master craftsman Daedalus to be impossible to escape. Its passages twisted and turned in patterns so complex that even its creator needed guidance to find his way out. But Ariadne, daughter of King Minos, had fallen in love with the handsome young hero and was determined to save him. She sought the advice of Daedalus himself, who told her that the labyrinth's greatest danger was not the Minotaur, but the impossibility of finding the exit after the monster was defeated. The solution was elegantly simple, a ball of thread that the Greeks called a clue. Ariadne gave this to Theseus before he entered the labyrinth, instructing him to tie one end to the entrance and unwind the thread as he walked, creating a path that he could follow back to safety. The word clue originally referred to any ball of yarn or thread, but after the story of Theseus spread throughout the Greek world, it began to take on a metaphorical meaning of guidance through a difficult situation. Over centuries of linguistic evolution, clue became clue, expanding to mean any piece of information that helps solve a mystery or navigate a complex problem. 44. The tragic love story of Achilles and Patroclus. At the heart of the greatest war story ever told lay a love so profound that it transcended the boundaries between friendship and romance, between mortal and divine, between life and death itself, making the Iliad as much a story of devotion as it was of battlefield glory. Achilles and Patroclus had grown up together, their bond forged in the training grounds of the centaur Chiron, who taught them both the arts of war and the deeper wisdom of the heart. Ancient sources describe their relationship in terms that reveal its intensity, calling them kinsmen of the soul, whose connection went beyond mere friendship or even blood brotherhood. When the Trojan War began, Achilles joined the expedition not for glory or treasure, but because the oracle at Delphi had revealed his fate. He could live a long, quiet life in obscurity, or die young at Troy and achieve immortal fame. His choice was influenced by Patroclus, who would share either destiny at his side. For 9 years, they fought together as partners in battle. Achilles the unbeatable warrior, and Patroclus the gentle healer who tended wounded comrades and offered wise counsel when his beloved's temper flared too hot. When Achilles withdrew from battle after his quarrel with Agamemnon, Patroclus could not bear to watch Greek soldiers dying while his beloved sulked in their tent. He borrowed Achilles' armor and led the Myrmidons into battle, where Hector mistook him for Achilles and killed him after a fierce duel. Achilles' grief was so overwhelming that it literally changed the weather, proving that love could be stronger than even the mightiest warrior's pride. 45. Medusa as victim transformed into symbol. The story of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze could turn mortals to stone, contains layers of meaning that have made her one of the most enduring and complex figures in all mythology, transforming from victim to monster to symbol of female rage and power. In Ovid's version of the myth, Medusa was originally a beautiful maiden who served as a priestess in Athena's temple. Her hair was her crowning glory, flowing like spun gold and attracting admirers from across the ancient world. But this beauty became her curse when it caught the attention of Poseidon, who pursued her relentlessly despite her vows of chastity. When the sea god finally cornered her in Athena's own temple, he committed the ultimate act of sacrilege, violating both the maiden and the sacred space she was sworn to protect. One might expect the goddess of wisdom and justice to punish the perpetrator, but instead, Athena turned her wrath upon the victim. The transformation was as cruel as it was complete. Medusa's beautiful hair became a writhing mass of venomous serpents. Her lovely face became so hideous that anyone who looked upon it would be turned instantly to stone. Her sisters, Stheno and Euryale, shared her fate, becoming the three Gorgons who would haunt the edges of the world. But in this apparent punishment lay a twisted form of protection. No man could ever harm Medusa again, for any who looked upon her with evil intent would become a statue before he could touch her. Her monstrous appearance became both her prison and her shield, ensuring that she would never again be vulnerable to male violence. In modern times, Medusa has been reclaimed as a symbol of feminine rage and the transformation of victimhood into power. 46. Theseus and the political unification of Athens. Beyond his famous victory over the Minotaur, Theseus accomplished something far more significant for the future of Greek civilization: the political unification of Attica under Athenian rule, making him not just a monster slayer, but a founding father of democracy itself. When Theseus returned from Crete as a hero, he used his newfound fame and influence to undertake a revolutionary political project. The region of Attica was divided among numerous small communities, each with its own king, its own laws, and its own local traditions. These scattered settlements were constantly at war with each other, weakening the entire region and making it vulnerable to foreign invasion. Theseus proposed something unprecedented, the synoikismos, or dwelling together, a voluntary unification of all Attic communities under a single government based in Athens. This wasn't conquest through military force, but persuasion through the promise of shared prosperity and mutual protection. One by one, the kings of the smaller settlements agreed to give up their individual sovereignty in exchange for citizenship in a greater Athenian state. Theseus himself renounced absolute royal power, establishing instead a system where major decisions would be made by an assembly of citizens rather than a single ruler. His systematic elimination of various bandits and monsters throughout Attica served a deeper political purpose. He was literally clearing the roads and making travel safe, creating the infrastructure necessary for trade and communication between formerly isolated communities. The festival of the Panathenaea, which Theseus established to honor Athena, became a powerful symbol of Attic unity, bringing together people from all the newly unified communities to celebrate their shared identity as Athenians. Through these achievements, Theseus laid the groundwork for the democratic ideals that would make Athens the intellectual center of the ancient world. 47. Jason's unconventional heroism. Unlike the typical Greek hero who relied primarily on personal strength and individual prowess, Jason succeeded through a fundamentally different approach. His greatest asset was his ability to inspire loyalty and cooperation in others, making him perhaps the world's first example of leadership through charisma rather than force. When Jason undertook his quest for the Golden Fleece, he assembled a crew that read like a catalog of Greece's greatest heroes. Heracles brought his legendary strength. Orpheus provided music that could charm any creature. Castor and Pollux contributed their skills as horsemen and boxers. And dozens of other specialists each added their unique talents to the expedition. But Jason's role wasn't to overshadow his companions with superior abilities. Instead, he served as the catalyst that transformed a collection of individual heroes into a unified team. He had the rare gift of making each crew member feel valued and essential, understanding that the success of their mission depended on everyone working together rather than any single person's achievements. This collaborative approach was most evident in his relationship with Medea, the powerful sorceress who fell in love with him and provided the magical assistance that made victory possible, where other heroes might have relied solely on their own strength. Jason recognized that accepting help from a knowledgeable ally was wisdom, not weakness. His ability to navigate complex social and political situations proved just as valuable as any sword or shield. When the Argonauts encountered hostile peoples during their journey, Jason often succeeded through diplomacy and negotiation rather than combat, showing that sometimes the most heroic choice was finding a way to avoid unnecessary violence. This unconventional approach to heroism made Jason a more realistic model for ordinary mortals, proving that leadership and courage could be more important than superhuman strength. 48. The real-world inspiration for the Golden Fleece. The legendary Golden Fleece that Jason and the Argonauts sought may have been inspired by actual ancient mining techniques still practiced in the Caucasus region during the classical period, providing a fascinating example of how real-world activities could be transformed into mythological quests. In the mountainous regions around Caucasus, where the myth places the Golden Fleece, local miners had developed an ingenious method for extracting gold from mountain streams. They would stretch sheepskins across the flowing water, anchoring them with stones so that the river would flow through the wool. The fleece acted as a natural filter, trapping tiny flakes of gold that had been eroded from upstream deposits. After several weeks of this process, the miners would remove the sheepskins and carefully wash them, collecting the accumulated gold dust that had been caught in the wool fibers. The fleeces, now literally golden with precious metal, would be dried and processed to separate the gold from the wool, creating what could genuinely be called golden fleeces. Archaeological evidence suggests that this mining technique was already ancient by the time the Jason myth was recorded, meaning that Greek storytellers may have heard accounts of these golden fleeces from traders and travelers who had visited the region. The exotic location, the mysterious process, and the valuable end result would have provided perfect material for mythological embellishment. This interpretation suggests that Jason's quest may have been based on real Bronze Age trading expeditions that ventured into the dangerous waters of the Black Sea to obtain precious metals and other valuable goods from the peoples of the Caucasus. The supernatural elements of the story, the fire-breathing bulls, the dragon, Medea's magic, could represent the real dangers and challenges that such expeditions faced in hostile territory. 49. Odysseus as the thinking hero. In a culture that typically celebrated physical prowess and martial valor, Odysseus represented a revolutionary type of hero whose greatest weapon was his mind, earning him the epithet Polytropos, meaning of many turns or of many ways, and establishing intelligence as a form of courage equal to any warrior's strength. The 10-year journey that took Odysseus from the ruins of Troy back to his home on Ithaca was far more than a geographical odyssey. It was a psychological and spiritual transformation that tested every aspect of his character. Each island he visited presented not just physical dangers, but moral challenges that required him to choose between immediate gratification and long-term wisdom. On the island of the Lotus Cedars, Odysseus had to resist the temptation of forgetful bliss, understanding that a life without memory or purpose was no life at all. In the cave of the Cyclops Polyphemus, he demonstrated that sometimes the best strategy was not direct confrontation, but clever deception, using the giant's own assumptions against him. His encounter with the sirens revealed perhaps his greatest insight, that some temptations could only be overcome by acknowledging their power while taking precautions against their influence, rather than trying to resist their song through willpower alone. He had his crew plug their ears with beeswax while tying him to the mast, allowing him to hear their music without being able to act on their commands. The choice between Scylla and Charybdis demonstrated his understanding that leadership sometimes required making terrible decisions with no perfect options, accepting calculated losses to achieve the greater good. Each challenge taught him something new about the nature of wisdom, courage, and the responsibilities of leadership, preparing him for the final test of reclaiming his kingdom and his family. 50. The cosmic significance of Bellerophon's fall. The story of Bellerophon and his winged horse Pegasus serves as one of mythology's most powerful warnings about the dangers of hubris, showing how even the greatest achievements can become the foundation for catastrophic pride that challenges the very order of the cosmos. Bellerophon had accomplished the impossible, taming Pegasus, slaying the fire-breathing Chimera, and defeating the Amazons and other monstrous foes. These victories made him one of the greatest heroes of his generation, beloved by mortals and respected even by the gods. But success, rather than teaching him humility, filled him with a dangerous conviction that he was destined for even greater things. The moment of his downfall came when Bellerophon decided that his heroic achievements had earned him the right to join the gods on Mount Olympus. Mounting his faithful Pegasus, he began to fly upward toward the divine realm, convinced that Zeus would welcome him as an equal and grant him immortality as a reward for his service. But the king of the gods viewed this presumption as the worst kind of blasphemy. Zeus sent a gadfly to sting Pegasus, causing the horse to buck and throw his rider from the heavens. Bellerophon's fall was both literal and metaphorical, as he crashed to earth far from any civilization, his body broken and his eyes blinded by the divine light he had dared to approach. The cruelest aspect of his punishment was that Zeus allowed him to live, condemned to wander the earth as a crippled beggar, forever searching for the winged horse who had once carried him to glory. This eternal separation from Pegasus represented the hero's alienation from the very qualities that had made him great, showing that pride could transform our greatest strengths into our most painful losses. 51. Orpheus and the power of art over death. The myth of Orpheus represents perhaps the most profound exploration in all literature of art's power to move the human heart, to transcend the boundaries between life and death, and to challenge the fundamental laws that govern existence itself. Orpheus possessed a voice and a musical skill that surpassed even the gods. His lyre could make stones weep, trees uproot themselves to follow his melodies, and wild beasts lie down together in peaceful harmony. But all this power meant nothing to him without Eurydice, the nymph whose love had given meaning to his extraordinary gifts. When Eurydice died from a serpent's bite while fleeing the unwanted advances of Aristeus, Orpheus's grief was so overwhelming that his music changed completely. Instead of the joyful melodies that had once celebrated life and love, his songs became lamentations so heartbreaking that even the gods wept to hear them. Determined to reclaim his beloved, Orpheus descended into the underworld, using his music to charm his way past Cerberus, the ferryman Charon, and all the guardians of the dead. When he reached the throne of Hades and Persephone, he He sang of love and loss with such power that for the first time in cosmic history, the king of the dead shed a tear. Moved by his artistry, Hades agreed to release Eurydice on one condition. Orpheus must walk ahead of her on the journey back to the surface, trusting that she followed without looking back to confirm her presence. This test of faith proved too difficult for the grieving musician, his doubt overcoming his trust at the crucial moment. The tragedy of Orpheus suggests that while art can move us profoundly and even challenge the laws of nature, it cannot ultimately change the fundamental conditions of existence, making it both humanity's greatest consolation and its most beautiful limitation. 52. Hero worship in ancient Greece. The veneration of heroes in ancient Greece went far beyond storytelling and entertainment, developing into actual religious practices that treated these legendary figures as powerful spiritual intermediaries between the mortal and divine realms. Unlike the Olympian gods who lived on high and concerned themselves with cosmic affairs, heroes were believed to remain connected to specific earthly locations, their physical remains serving as focal points for divine power that could benefit local communities. These burial sites, called Heroa, became some of the most important religious centers in the Greek world. The heroes' bones were considered especially potent sources of protection and blessing. Cities would compete fiercely to possess the remains of famous heroes, sometimes going to war or conducting elaborate diplomatic negotiations to secure these precious relics. The bones of Orestes were said to have helped Sparta defeat Tegea, while Athens credited its acquisition of Theseus's remains with several military victories. Regular festivals honored these buried heroes with sacrifices, athletic competitions, and dramatic performances that retold their legendary deeds. These celebrations served multiple purposes. They maintained the community's connection to their protective hero, provided opportunities for social bonding and cultural expression, and reinforced local identity and pride. The hero cult represented a uniquely Greek understanding of the relationship between death and power. Rather than viewing death as the end of influence, Greeks believed that heroes became more powerful after death, freed from the limitations of mortal existence, while retaining their concern for the places and people they had loved in life. This practice influenced later religious developments, including early Christianity's veneration of saints and martyrs, showing how ancient Greek spiritual innovations continued to shape religious thought for centuries after the classical period ended. 53. The hero constellations. The night sky served as a vast storybook where the greatest heroes of Greek mythology achieved a form of immortality that surpassed even the fame of earthly monuments. Their adventures permanently inscribed among the stars for all future generations to read and remember. Perseus became one of the most prominent constellations in the northern sky, depicted holding the severed head of Medusa with the star Algol representing her blinking eye. This variable star, which dims and brightens on a regular cycle, was seen by ancient astronomers as Medusa's eye winking at observers, adding an element of cosmic drama to the constellation's appearance. The entire family from Perseus's myth was immortalized together in what astronomers call a constellation family, Andromeda. The princess he rescued lies chained to the celestial sphere nearby. Her parents, Cassiopeia and Cepheus, sit eternally watching over their daughter. Even Cetus, the sea monster that threatened to devour Andromeda, received a place among the stars, ensuring that the complete story would be visible to anyone who knew how to read the night sky. Hercules achieved stellar immortality as one of the largest constellations, his position near the celestial equator making him visible from both hemispheres of the Earth. The constellation's shape was said to represent the hero kneeling in victory, perhaps after completing one of his famous labors. Orion, the great hunter, became one of the most recognizable star patterns in the sky, his three-star belt serving as a celestial landmark for navigators and astronomers throughout history. The constellation's position near the celestial equator, like that of Hercules, ensured that the hunter's story could be seen from anywhere on Earth. These stellar heroes serve practical as well as mythological purposes, helping ancient peoples navigate by sea and mark the changing seasons by land, proving that even in their cosmic form, the heroes continued to serve and guide humanity. 54. The divine parentage pattern. The consistent pattern of mixed divine and mortal parentage among Greek heroes was not a random storytelling convention, but a deliberate mythological structure that reflected profound truths about the nature of heroism and humanity's relationship to the divine realm. Most heroes shared this fundamental characteristic. One parent was a god or goddess while the other was mortal, placing these legendary figures in a unique position between the earthly and celestial realms. Perseus was the son of Zeus and the mortal princess Danae. Heracles was born from Zeus's union with the mortal woman Alcmene. And Theseus claimed both the sea god Poseidon and the mortal king Aegeus as fathers. This mixed heritage gave heroes abilities that surpassed ordinary mortals, while still leaving them vulnerable to the limitations and sufferings that define human existence. They possessed strength, courage, and insight beyond normal human capacity, yet they could still be wounded, could still make mistakes, and ultimately could still die. The divine parent typically provided the heroes extraordinary abilities and cosmic significance, while the mortal parent contributed the humanity and vulnerability that made the heroes' struggles meaningful and relatable. This combination created figures who could serve as bridges between gods and mortals, understanding both divine power and human weakness. The pattern also reflected the Greek belief that true greatness required both divine inspiration and human effort. Heroes had to earn their legendary status through their choices and actions, not simply inherited through divine parentage. Their divine blood gave them the capacity for great deeds, but they still had to choose to use that capacity for heroic purposes. This mythological structure continues to influence storytelling today, appearing in modern superhero narratives where characters often possess extraordinary abilities while maintaining fundamentally human concerns and vulnerabilities, proving the enduring power of this ancient insight into the nature of heroism. 55. The Argonauts as ancient superhero team. The crew of the Argo represented something unprecedented in ancient storytelling. A carefully assembled team of specialists whose individual abilities complemented each other perfectly, creating a group whose combined power far exceeded what any single hero could achieve alone. Jason's genius lay not in his personal prowess, but in his ability to recognize and recruit the perfect team for his impossible mission. Heracles brought legendary strength that could power the ship through dangerous waters and overcome physical obstacles. Orpheus provided music that could charm hostile creatures, calm storms, and maintain crew morale during the darkest moments of their journey. Castor and Pollux, the divine twins, served as the expedition's cavalry, their skill with horses making them invaluable for land-based missions and reconnaissance. Zets and Calais, the winged sons of the North Wind, could scout ahead and pursue flying enemies like the Harpies who tormented the prophet Phineas. Lynceus possessed eyesight, so keen he could see through the earth itself, making him the perfect lookout and navigator. Atalanta, the only woman among the Argonauts in most versions, brought unmatched archery skills and hunting expertise. Asclepius, the son of Apollo, served as the expedition's physician, ensuring that injuries could be treated and diseases prevented. The ship itself was a technological marvel built with Athena's assistance, incorporating prophetic timber from the sacred grove of Dodona that could provide guidance and warnings. This made the Argo not just a vessel, but an active participant in the quest, contributing its own form of intelligence to the team's efforts. The Argonauts' success came from understanding that different challenges required different solutions, and that the best way to overcome impossible odds was through cooperation rather than competition. establishing a template for team-based heroism that continues to influence modern storytelling. 56. The moral complexity of Greek heroes. Greek heroes were not idealized moral exemplars, but complex figures whose greatness coexisted with serious character flaws, reflecting a sophisticated understanding that heroism and virtue were separate qualities that didn't always coincide in the same person. Heracles, despite his legendary strength and noble quest for redemption, had a violent temper that led him to commit terrible acts throughout his life. He killed his music teacher Linus with a lyre during a moment of frustration, murdered his own children during a fit of divine madness, and later killed his friend Iphitus by throwing him from the walls of Tiryns during an argument. Theseus, celebrated as Athens' greatest king and the founder of democracy, abandoned Ariadne on the island of Naxos after she had saved his life by helping him escape the labyrinth. This act of casual betrayal towards someone who had risked everything for him revealed a callous side to his character that existed alongside his political wisdom and heroic courage. Achilles, the greatest warrior of his generation, allowed his pride to endanger the entire Greek expedition at Troy, withdrawing from battle and sulking in his tent while his comrades died. Even after returning to combat to avenge Patroclus, he desecrated Hector's body by dragging it behind his chariot, showing that grief and rage could corrupt even the noblest hearts. This moral complexity served important cultural functions. It made heroes more relatable to ordinary mortals who struggled with their own character flaws and moral failures. It also emphasized that heroic actions required conscious choice rather than automatic virtue, making each heroic deed more meaningful because it represented a decision to do good despite the presence of darker impulses. The Greek understanding that greatness and goodness were separate qualities helped create more realistic and ultimately more inspiring role models, showing that ordinary people with ordinary flaws could still achieve extraordinary things through their choices and actions. 57. The centaur Chiron as wise mentor. Among all the centaurs who galloped through Greek mythology, none was more beloved or respected than Chiron, whose wisdom and kindness stood in stark contrast to the wild, lustful nature typically associated with his half-human, half-horse kinsman. Chiron's noble character stemmed from his unique parentage. While most centaurs were born from a union of Ixion and a cloud shaped like Hera, Chiron was the son of the Titan Cronus and the nymph Philyra. This divine heritage gave him intelligence and self-control that other centaurs lacked, making him capable of the patience and wisdom necessary for teaching. His cave on Mount Pelion became the ancient world's most prestigious academy, where the greatest heroes of Greece came to learn not just warfare and athletics, but music, medicine, astronomy, and the deeper wisdom of living a meaningful life. Achilles learned the arts of war and healing under Chiron's guidance. Jason developed the leadership skills that would serve him well during the Argonaut quest, and Asclepius acquired the medical knowledge that would make him the god of healing. Chiron's teaching methods emphasized the connection between physical and spiritual development. He believed that true heroism required not just strength and skill, but also compassion, wisdom, and understanding of one's place in the larger cosmos. His students learned to see themselves as servants of justice rather than merely seekers of personal glory. The centaur's fate was both tragic and noble. When Heracles accidentally wounded him with an arrow dipped in the Hydra's poison, the immortal Chiron faced eternal agony from a wound that could never heal. Rather than endure endless suffering, he chose to trade his immortality with Prometheus, freeing the Titan from his eternal punishment while accepting death as his own release. This final act of selfless sacrifice epitomized everything Chiron had taught his students about the true nature of heroism. 58. Regional variations in hero myths. The stories of Greek heroes were not fixed narratives, but living traditions that evolved and adapted to reflect the values, politics, and cultural identity of different city-states. creating a rich tapestry of regional variations that revealed how the same mythological figures could serve different purposes in different communities. Athenian versions of Theseus's myth emphasized his role as a democratic reformer and unifier, portraying him as the wise king who voluntarily limited his own power to create a more just society. These stories served to legitimize Athens' political system and its claims to leadership among Greek cities, showing that their democracy had divine sanction through their legendary founder. Spartan retellings of various hero myths consistently emphasized military valor, physical endurance, and self-sacrifice for the common good. Their versions of Heracles focused on his strength and perseverance rather than his intelligence or compassion, reflecting Sparta's warrior culture and its emphasis on physical excellence. Theban traditions naturally highlighted heroes connected to their city, developing elaborate cycles of stories around figures like Cadmus, Oedipus, and the Seven Against Thebes. These tales reinforced Theban identity and provided historical legitimacy for the city's political claims, particularly during periods of conflict with Athens and Sparta. Argive myths emphasize the city's ancient connections to major heroes like Perseus and the descendants of Danaus, using these stories to support their claims to primacy among Greek cities and their right to leadership roles in pan-Hellenic enterprises. These regional variations served important social and political functions, helping communities define their identity, justify their institutions, and maintain pride in their local heritage. They also show how myths remain vital and relevant by continuously adapting to meet the changing needs of the societies that preserve them. 59. The heroic journey as spiritual transformation. The pattern that Joseph Campbell famously identified as the hero's journey was already well established in Greek mythology, where heroic quests consistently followed a structure that reflected ancient beliefs about spiritual growth and the process of achieving wisdom through ordeal and transformation. Every heroic journey began with departure from the familiar world, representing the necessary step of leaving behind comfortable assumptions and secure identities to discover one's true potential. Perseus left the safety of his mother's protection. Theseus abandoned his comfortable life as a prince, and Jason gave up his claim to his father's throne, all choosing uncertainty and danger over security and ease. The trials and adventures that followed were not random obstacles, but carefully structured tests that forced heroes to develop specific virtues and abilities. Each challenge revealed something new about the hero's character while providing opportunities to grow beyond previous limitations. The monsters they faced often represented internal obstacles, fear, anger, pride, or despair, that had to be overcome for true heroism to emerge. The supernatural aid that heroes received from gods, magic weapons, or wise mentors represented the resources that become available to those who commit themselves fully to a worthy cause. These gifts were never given freely, but had to be earned through demonstrated courage, wisdom, or self-sacrifice. The return home with wisdom or treasure completed the cycle. But the heroes who came back were fundamentally changed by their experiences. They brought not just material benefits, but new understanding that could help their communities face their own challenges more effectively. This pattern reflected Greek beliefs about personal development and the relationship between individual growth and social responsibility, showing that true heroes were those who used their adventures to benefit others rather than simply seeking personal glory or gain. 60. The eternal resonance of Greek heroes. The heroes of Greek mythology continue to captivate modern audiences, not because their stories are escapist fantasies, but because they address fundamental questions about human nature and the meaning of life that remain as relevant today as they were 3,000 years ago. Achilles embodies the eternal tension between fate and free will, forced to choose between a long, obscure life and a short, glorious one. His struggle represents every person's need to decide what values will guide their choices and what kind of legacy they want to leave behind, making his ancient dilemma timelessly relevant to modern readers. Orpheus represents the power and limitations of art to transform reality and overcome loss. His journey to the underworld speaks to anyone who has experienced profound grief and sought ways to use creativity and beauty to find meaning in suffering. While his ultimate failure reminds us that some losses cannot be undone, only endured and transformed into something meaningful. Theseus embodies the challenge of leadership and the difficulty of building just societies. His political achievements in unifying Attica, while his personal failures in relationships, show the complex balance between public service and private happiness that continues to challenge leaders in every era. Heracles represents the possibility of redemption through service and the transformation of guilt into purpose. His 12 labors show how even the most terrible mistakes can become opportunities for growth and contribution, offering hope to anyone who struggles with regret or the need to make amends for past failures. These enduring themes explain why Greek heroes remain powerful symbols in literature, film, and popular culture, continuing to provide metaphors and inspiration for people seeking to understand their own heroic potential and the meaning of a life well lived. 61. The surprising birth of Pegasus from tragedy. When Perseus raised his bronze sword and severed Medusa's head in one swift stroke, he expected to escape quickly from the lair of the Gorgons before her immortal sisters could awaken and pursue him. What he did not expect was to witness one of the most miraculous births in all mythology, as two extraordinary beings sprang fully formed from the dying Gorgon's neck. First came Pegasus, the magnificent winged horse whose coat gleamed like fresh snow touched by starlight. His wings unfurled with a sound like thunder, and his first act was to leap skyward, soaring toward the heavens as if eager to escape the scene of his unusual birth. The horse's name came from the Greek word pegi, meaning springs, because he was said to create fresh water wherever his hooves touched the earth. Beside him emerged Chrysaor, a golden giant whose name meant, "He who bears a golden sword." This mysterious figure would later become the father of the three-bodied monster Geryon, whom Heracles would face during his 10th labor. But in that moment of birth, both beings represented something miraculous, the transformation of death and horror into beauty and power. The birth of these creatures from Medusa's death revealed a profound truth about the nature of transformation in Greek mythology. Even the most terrible events could give rise to something wonderful and meaningful. Medusa's tragedy, her transformation from beautiful maiden to monster, ultimately produced one of mythology's most beloved creatures, proving that beauty and horror, creation and destruction, were often two sides of the same cosmic process. Pegasus would go on to become the Mount of Heroes and eventually earn a place among the stars. While his birth from such tragic circumstances reminded all who heard the tale that even the darkest moments could contain the seeds of something magnificent. 62. The two different types of Cyclopes. In the vast tapestry of Greek mythology, the one-eyed giants known as Cyclopes appeared in two distinct forms that represented completely different aspects of divine and mortal nature, showing how the same basic concept could evolve to serve different storytelling purposes across generations. The elder Cyclopes, Argesh, Steropes, and Brontes were divine beings whose names meant thunderer, lightner, and vivid. These three brothers were among the first children of Gaia and Uranus, making them siblings to the Titans and among the oldest conscious beings in the cosmos. Their single eyes burned with the fire of creation itself, and their massive hands possessed the skill to forge wonders that no mortal craftsman could imagine. Working in the volcanic depths beneath Mount Etna, these divine Cyclopes created the weapons that would determine the fate of the cosmos. For Zeus, they forged thunderbolts that could shatter mountains and illuminate the darkest nights. Poseidon received his mighty trident, capable of stirring earthquakes and commanding the seas. Hades was given a helmet of invisibility that allowed him to move unseen through any realm. But the later tradition spoke of very different cyclopes, savage shepherds who lived in caves on the island of Sicily and knew nothing of civilized arts or divine craftsmanship. These were the children of Poseidon, brutish giants like Polyphemus who cared only for their flocks and their next meal, lacking both the wisdom and the skill of their divine predecessors. The contrast between these two types revealed the Greek understanding that the same basic nature could manifest in completely different ways depending on heritage, education, and choice, showing that even giants could be either creators or destroyers. 63. Chiron as the exception among centaurs. In the wild forests and mountains of ancient Greece, where centaurs galloped in drunken revelry and pursued nymphs with lustful abandon, one figure stood apart as a beacon of wisdom and virtue that proved exceptions could transcend the limitations of their nature. Chiron's nobility stemmed from his unique origin among the centaur race. While his kinsmen were born from a union of Ixion and a cloud fashioned to resemble Hera, Chiron was the son of the Titan Cronus and the ocean nymph Philyra. This divine parentage blessed him with intelligence, self-control, and compassion that his half-brothers completely lacked, making him the most righteous of the centaurs. Where other centaurs spent their time drinking, fighting, and chasing after anything that moved, Chiron dedicated himself to the pursuit of knowledge and the education of heroes. His cave on Mount Pelion became a sanctuary of learning where the greatest figures of Greek legend came to study not just warfare and athletics, but medicine, music, astronomy, and the deeper wisdom of living an honorable life. His students included Achilles, who learned both the arts of war and the gentler skills of healing, Jason, who developed the leadership abilities that would serve him during the Argonauts' quest, and Asclepius, who would become the god of medicine through knowledge gained from his centaur teacher. Chiron's methods emphasized the connection between physical and spiritual development, teaching that true strength came from harmony between body, mind, and soul. The centaur's tragic fate only enhanced his noble reputation. When Heracles accidentally wounded him with an arrow dipped in the Hydra's poison, the immortal Chiron faced eternal agony from a wound that could never heal. Rather than endure endless suffering, he chose to sacrifice his immortality to free Prometheus from his torment, proving that wisdom and compassion could triumph even over the fear of death. 64. The Sphinx's riddle and its deeper meaning. On the rocky heights outside the gates of Thebes, a creature of terrible beauty posed the most famous riddle in all mythology, one whose answer would determine not just individual survival, but the fate of an entire city and the nature of human self-understanding. The Sphinx herself was a marvel of divine craftsmanship, combining the head of a woman, the body of a lion, and the wings of an eagle. Her human face possessed intelligence and cunning that made her riddles genuinely challenging, while her lion's strength ensured that wrong answers would be swiftly punished. Her eagle's wings allowed her to perch high above the road, where travelers had no choice but to face her challenge or turn back. The riddle she posed seemed simple enough. What has one voice but walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? But beneath this straightforward question lay layers of meaning that touched the very essence of human existence and the relationship between knowledge and wisdom. Oedipus, approaching the city where he would unknowingly fulfill his terrible destiny, answered correctly. Man, the riddle described the journey of human life, crawling as an infant, walking upright in maturity, and using a staff in old age. But the deeper meaning went beyond mere physical description to encompass the stages of human understanding and the cyclical nature of dependence and independence. The Sphinx's defeat and subsequent suicide represented more than just one monster's destruction. It symbolized the transition from old forms of knowledge based on mystery and fear to new understanding based on reason and human insight. Some scholars believe the Sphinx represented ancient religious practices that were being replaced by more rational approaches to understanding the world. making Oedipus's victory a triumph of enlightenment over superstition. 65. Sirens as punishment for failing Persephone. The deadly sirens who lured sailors to their doom with irresistible songs were not originally creatures of malice, but victims of divine punishment whose beautiful voices became instruments of destruction through the cruel justice of the gods. In their earliest form, the sirens were companions or servants of Persephone, the daughter of Demeter who would become queen of the underworld. Some traditions made them her close friends, while others described them as divine guardians assigned to protect the young goddess during her wanderings through meadows and forests. Their voices were renowned throughout the divine realm for their purity and beauty, often providing musical entertainment at gatherings of gods and goddesses. But when Hades abducted Persephone to make her his bride, the sirens failed in their primary duty, protecting their charge from harm. Whether they were absent during the crucial moment, distracted by their own pursuits, or simply overwhelmed by the power of the Lord of the underworld, their failure had cosmic consequences that would reshape their nature forever. Demeter, in her grief and rage over her daughter's disappearance, turned her wrath not only against the earth itself, but against those she held responsible for failing to prevent the tragedy. The sirens found themselves transformed from beautiful maidens into creatures with the bodies of birds and the heads of women, their lovely voices becoming weapons that would doom any mortal who heard them. Their punishment was particularly cruel because it corrupted their greatest gift. Where once their songs had brought joy and beauty to the world, now they could only bring death and destruction. Sailors who heard their melodies would be so enchanted that they would steer their ships toward the rocks, choosing certain death over the pain of leaving such perfect music behind. This transformation served as a warning about the responsibilities that come with divine favor and the terrible consequences of failing in one's duties to the gods. 66. Typhon and Echidna as the ultimate monster parents. In the shadowy depths beneath the earth, where primordial forces still stirred with the chaotic power of creation's earliest days, two beings came together whose union would populate the world with its most terrifying monsters, earning them the title Father and Mother of all monsters. Typhon was perhaps the most fearsome creature ever born, a giant so massive that his head brushed against the stars while his feet remained planted on the earth. From his shoulders sprouted 100 dragon heads, each one breathing fire and speaking in voices that could mimic any sound in creation. His eyes blazed with volcanic fire. His body was covered in feathers that rustled like hurricane winds, and his roar could shatter mountains and drain the courage from the bravest hearts. Echidna, his mate, was equally terrifying in her own way, beautiful from the waist up like the loveliest of nymphs. Her lower body was that of a monstrous serpent whose coils could crush the life from any creature she embraced. Her dual nature represented the seductive danger that made her offspring so deadly. They often appeared beautiful or harmless until it was too late for their victims to escape. Together, this nightmare couple produced a brood of creatures that would plague heroes throughout Greek mythology. The Lernaean Hydra, with its multiple heads and poisonous breath. The fire-breathing Chimera with its lion's head, goat's body, and serpent's tail. Cerberus, the three-headed dog who guarded the gates of Hades. The Sphinx with her deadly riddles. And the Nemean lion whose hide no weapon could pierce. Each of their children inherited different aspects of their parents' terrifying nature, ensuring the heroes would face a wide variety of challenges that tested different virtues and abilities. The offspring of Typhon and Echidna served as the ultimate test that separated true heroes from mere mortals, proving that the greatest accomplishments often required facing the most fearsome opponents. 67. The Harpies as divine wind spirits. The Harpies, whose name meant the Snatchers, were far more than simple monsters who stole food and tormented mortals. They were personifications of the violent storm winds that could appear without warning to carry away anything in their path, serving as agents of divine justice in the cosmic order. These creatures were born from the union of Thomas, the god of sea wonders, and the Oceanid Electra, making them sisters to Iris, the rainbow goddess who served as messenger to the gods. This divine heritage revealed their true nature as elemental forces rather than mere beasts, embodying the destructive power of wind and storm that could level forests, sink ships, and scatter armies like leaves. Their traditional appearance, women's heads and torsos with the wings and talons of birds, reflected their dual nature as both intelligent agents and natural forces. They possessed human consciousness and speech, allowing them to understand and carry out specific divine commands, while their avian features gave them the speed and power necessary to execute their missions across vast distances. The Harpies served as Zeus's enforcement agents, swooping down to carry away people or objects that had offended the gods or violated divine law. They were particularly associated with the punishment of oath breakers and those who showed disrespect to the divine order, snatching away their possessions, their food, or even their lives as payment for their transgressions. Their most famous intervention involved the blind prophet Phineas, who had revealed too many divine secrets to mortals. The Harpies were sent to torment him by stealing or fouling any food that was brought to him, ensuring that he would suffer constant hunger as punishment for his indiscretion. This torment continued until the winged sons of the North Wind, Zets and Calais, drove the Harpies away during the Argonauts' journey, showing that even divine punishment could sometimes be overcome through heroic intervention. 68. The Chimera's geological connection. The terrifying Chimera, with its lion's head breathing fire, goat's body in the middle, and serpent's tail, may have been inspired by one of the most remarkable natural phenomena in the ancient world, providing a fascinating example of how real geological features could be transformed into mythological monsters. The creature was said to dwell in Lycia, a region in what is now southwestern Turkey, where it terrorized the countryside until the hero Bellerophon, riding the winged horse Pegasus, managed to defeat it by dropping lead into its mouth, causing the metal to melt from the creature's fiery breath and choke it to death. Modern geological surveys of the Lycian region have revealed something extraordinary, a place called Mount Chimera, where natural gas seeping from underground deposits has created eternal flames that have been burning continuously for thousands of years. These flames emerge from rocky ground in multiple locations, creating an eerie landscape where fire appears to spring directly from the earth itself. Ancient travelers encountering this phenomenon would have found it deeply unsettling and supernatural. The flames would have seemed to confirm local stories about a fire-breathing monster dwelling in the area, while the rugged terrain and dangerous gases could have made the region genuinely hazardous to explore. The three-part nature of the Chimera might have reflected different aspects of this geological phenomenon. The lion's head could represent the fierce, roaring sound that natural gas fires often produce. The goat's body might symbolize the rocky, mountainous terrain where the flames appeared, and the serpent's tail could represent the twisting, unpredictable patterns that the flames followed as they emerged from various fissures. This connection between myth and geology shows how ancient peoples used storytelling to explain and remember important information about their environment, transforming dangerous natural phenomena into memorable tales that would warn future generations about the hazards they might encounter. 69. Nymphs as nature's helpful healers. Unlike many of the fearsome creatures that populated Greek mythology, nymphs represented the benevolent aspect of the natural world, serving as gentle guardians who protected sacred places and provided aid to both gods and mortals who approached them with respect and proper reverence. These beautiful nature spirits were divided into different types based on their particular domains and responsibilities. Dryads were tree nymphs whose lives were intimately connected to specific trees, particularly oak, ash, and pine. They could emerge from their wooden homes to dance in moonlit clearings or to help lost travelers find their way. but they would die if their trees were cut down or destroyed by fire. Naiads presided over freshwater sources, springs, rivers, lakes, and wells, and were renowned for their healing powers. Mortals would visit sacred springs hoping to be cured of diseases or injuries, leaving offerings of flowers, honey, or small treasures in exchange for the nymph's blessing. Many of these healing springs continued to be venerated well into historical times, with some becoming famous medical centers. Oreads were mountain nymphs who guided hunters and shepherds through dangerous terrain, helped them find lost animals, and protected them from avalanches and rockfalls. They were often associated with Echo, the nymph whose voice could repeat sounds across mountain valleys, and with Artemis, the goddess of the hunt who employed many Oreads as her companions. Nereids were seen nymphs who aided sailors in distress, calming storms, guiding ships away from dangerous rocks, and sometimes even rescuing drowning men. The most famous member was Thetis, the mother of Achilles, who married the mortal Peleus and tried to make their son immortal by dipping him in the river Styx. These helpful spirits represented the Greek understanding that nature, while sometimes dangerous, was fundamentally beneficial to those who approached it with wisdom and respect. 70. The Minotaur's Labyrinth as symbol of the human psyche. The labyrinth beneath the palace of King Minos was far more than a simple prison for a monster. It represented one of the most sophisticated symbols in all mythology, embodying the complexity of the human mind and the difficulty of confronting the dark aspects of our own nature. Designed by Daedalus, the master craftsman whose name meant cunningly wrought, the labyrinth was described as so intricate that even its creator needed guidance to navigate its winding passages. This maze wasn't simply large, but psychologically disorienting, designed to confuse and trap anyone who entered by overwhelming their ability to maintain a sense of direction or purpose. The Minotaur itself, half human and half bull, represented the beast within human nature that must be acknowledged and confronted rather than simply denied or ignored. Its placement at the heart of the labyrinth suggested that our most challenging internal conflicts lie deep within the unconscious mind, requiring considerable effort and courage to reach and resolve. Theseus's journey through the labyrinth paralleled the psychological process of self-discovery and personal growth. The ball of thread provided by Ariadne represented the need for guidance, memory, and connection to the outside world when undertaking the dangerous journey into one's own depths. Without this lifeline, even a successful confrontation with inner demons could leave one lost and unable to return to normal life. The defeat of the Minotaur was not the end of the story, but the beginning of transformation. By facing and overcoming the beast within, Theseus proved that it was possible to integrate the darker aspects of human nature rather than being destroyed by them. His emergence from the labyrinth represented the achievement of psychological wholeness, while his relationship with Ariadne symbolized the importance of love and connection in sustaining us through difficult personal growth. Modern psychologists have found the labyrinth metaphor so powerful that it continues to be used in therapeutic settings, helping people understand and navigate their own psychological complexities. 71. Pandora's box was actually a jar, one of the most enduring images in Western culture. Pandora opening a small box and releasing evil into the world is based on a translation error that has persisted for over 400 years, transforming the original meaning of this profound myth about curiosity, hope, and the nature of human suffering. In Hesiod's original telling of the story, Pandora was given not a box, but a pithos, a large ceramic storage jar that stood nearly as tall as a person and was partially buried in the ground for stability. These vessels were common in ancient Greek households, used to store grain, oil, wine, and other essential supplies for surviving the winter months. The mistranslation occurred during the Renaissance when the humanist scholar Erasmus changed the Greek pithos to the Latin pyxis, meaning a small casket or box. This seemingly minor alteration fundamentally changed the story's symbolism. transforming Pandora from someone who opened a massive storage container that dominated her dwelling space into someone who merely lifted the lid of a decorative trinket. The original jar connected Pandora directly to Gaia, the Earth Mother, since Pithoi were buried partly underground and were associated with the Earth's capacity to store and preserve life's necessities. When Pandora opened the Great Jar, she was symbolically opening the Earth itself, releasing forces that had been contained within the very foundation of existence. The size and placement of the original Pithos also changed the nature of Pandora's choice. Opening a large, prominently placed storage jar required deliberate, sustained effort rather than a moment of casual curiosity. This made her action more significant and meaningful, suggesting that the release of suffering into the world was not an accident, but a necessary part of human development. The image of the massive jar also better explains why hope remained trapped inside when Pandora closed the container, since a few spirits remaining in such a large vessel would be more believable than hope somehow being left behind in a small box. 72. Hope's ambiguous role in Pandora's story. The most puzzling and debated aspect of Pandora's myth concerns the role of hope, which remained trapped in the jar when she closed it after releasing all the evils into the world, creating a philosophical mystery that has engaged scholars and thinkers for over 2 millennia. Some interpreters see Hope's imprisonment as humanity's greatest tragedy, arguing that when Pandora closed the jar, she denied mortals their most important consolation in the face of suffering. According to this reading, humans must endure disease, old age, vow, and death without the comfort of hope to sustain them through their trials, making their condition truly desperate and hopeless. Other scholars argue the opposite, that Hope's confinement was actually Zeus's greatest mercy. They contend that hope can be more dangerous than any suffering because it prevents people from accepting reality and making rational decisions about their circumstances. False hope leads to poor choices, wasted effort, and even greater disappointment when unrealistic expectations inevitably fail to materialize. A third interpretation suggests that Hope's position in the jar was always different from the evils, representing not another curse, but a potential blessing that remains available to humanity despite the presence of suffering. In this reading, hope stays safely contained until humans are ready to access it through their own choice and effort, making it a resource that cannot be taken away but must be actively claimed. The Greek word elpis adds another layer of complexity, since it can mean either hope or expectation. And expectations can be either positive or negative. This linguistic ambiguity suggests that what remained in the jar might represent the human capacity to anticipate the future, which can be either blessing or curse depending on how it's used. The myth's enduring power lies partly in this ambiguity, allowing each generation to find in Pandora's story a reflection of their own understanding of hope's role in human life. 73. Persephone's pomegranate seeds and seasonal variations. The story of Persephone's return from the underworld contains one of mythology's most significant details, the number of pomegranate seeds she consumed, which directly determined how many months of winter mortals would have to endure each year. Yet, different ancient sources provide different numbers, creating multiple versions of seasonal reality. The most common version states that Persephone ate 6 pomegranate seeds, binding her to spend 6 months in the underworld with Hades and 6 months above ground with her mother Demeter. This created the familiar pattern of summer and winter, with Persephone's absence corresponding to the cold months when plants die and her return bringing the spring renewal of growth and flowering. However, other ancient sources tell different stories. Some versions claim she ate only 4 seeds, creating a shorter winter of 4 months balanced by 8 months of growing season. This variation might have reflected the milder climate of southern Greece and the Mediterranean islands, where winter was indeed shorter and less severe than in northern regions. Still, other traditions maintain that Persephone consumed only 3 seeds, resulting in an even briefer winter period. This version might have been particularly popular in areas like Egypt or North Africa, where Greek colonies experienced very mild winters that barely interrupted the agricultural cycle. The pomegranate itself was deeply symbolic in these stories, representing both death and rebirth due to its blood-red seeds hidden within pale flesh. In ancient fertility religions, the fruit was associated with the cycle of seasonal death and renewal, making it the perfect symbol for Persephone's dual role as Maiden of Spring and Queen of the Dead. These numerical variations show how Greek myths adapted to different climatic and cultural conditions, allowing the same basic story to remain relevant and meaningful across the diverse geographic regions where Greek culture spread, proving that mythology could be both universal and local simultaneously. 74. Orpheus's music made even death cry. When Orpheus descended into the underworld to reclaim his beloved Eurydice, his lyre produced music so beautiful and heartbreaking that it accomplished something unprecedented in all of cosmic history. It moved the Lord of the Dead himself to shed a tear, proving that even the most fundamental forces of existence could be touched by artistic truth. The journey to Hades required Orpheus to pass through multiple layers of supernatural guardians, each more formidable than the last. Cerberus, the three-headed dog whose job was to prevent any living being from entering the realm of the dead, lay down and whimpered like a puppy when he heard the musician's song. Charon, the ancient ferryman who transported souls across the river Styx, forgot to demand payment and rowed Orpheus across without question, tears streaming down his weathered face. But the greatest test came when Orpheus reached the throne room of Hades and Persephone, where he sang of love and loss with such power that his music seemed to stop time itself. The tormented souls who served eternal punishments throughout the underworld found brief respite from their suffering. Tantalus forgot his eternal hunger. Sisyphus sat down on his boulder, and the Furies covered their faces and wept. Most remarkably, Hades himself, who had witnessed countless ages of death and suffering without showing emotion, shed a single tear that was described in ancient sources as pitch black as tar. This detail was significant because it represented the only time in all of Greek mythology when death itself was moved to weep, showing that Orpheus's music could reach even the most hardened and pitiless heart. The terror of Hades validated the power of art to touch the deepest truths of existence and to create empathy even in those who seemed beyond all feeling, establishing music and poetry as forces that could transcend the normal boundaries between life and death. Joy and sorrow, hope and despair. 75. The real reason Orpheus looked back. Most modern retellings of the Orpheus myth focus on love or impatience as the reason for his fatal glance backward. But the original ancient sources reveal a more complex and psychologically realistic motivation, doubt, which makes the tragedy far more relatable and profound than simple romantic passion. According to the earliest versions of the story, Orpheus began his journey back to the surface world filled with confidence and joy, believing that his musical triumph in the underworld had secured Eurydice's return to life. But as he climbed the long, dark passage that led from Hades to the world above, a terrible realization began to gnaw at his mind. Eurydice, being a shade, made no sound as she walked. Her footsteps fell silently on the stone path. Her breathing made no whisper, and her voice could not call out to reassure him of her presence. As the journey continued hour after hour in complete silence, Orpheus began to fear that the gods had tricked him, that he was climbing alone while Eurydice remained trapped in the underworld. This doubt was not born from lack of love, but from very human psychology. When we cannot see or hear confirmation of something we desperately want to believe, our minds naturally begin to question and worry. The darkness of the passage amplified his fears, while the complete silence behind him provided no evidence that his beloved was actually following. Ancient writers understood that this made Orpheus's failure more tragic, not less. If he had looked back from impatience or selfishness, His mistake would have been a character flaw, but looking back from doubt made him a victim of natural human psychology, showing that even the most devoted love could be undermined by the simple inability to trust without confirmation. This version of the story resonates more deeply because it reflects genuine human experience, the difficulty of maintaining faith when circumstances provide no evidence to support our hopes. 76. The Trojan War's divine origin. The greatest war in ancient literature was not the result of human passion or political ambition, but part of an elaborate divine plan to reduce the human population, revealing Zeus's role as cosmic population controller who viewed mortal suffering as a necessary solution to environmental problems. According to the lost epic poem, the Cypria, which provided background for Homer's Iliad, Zeus collaborated with Themis, the goddess of divine law, to deliberately orchestrate the Trojan War because the earth was groaning under the weight of too many people. The rapid growth of human population had begun to disturb the natural balance, threatening to exhaust the earth's resources and disrupt the cosmic order. The divine plan was intricate and long-term, involving multiple generations and seemingly unrelated events. The wedding of Peleus and Thetis, where Ares threw the golden apple that led to the judgment of Paris, was arranged specifically to set these events in motion. Paris's abduction of Helen, rather than being a spontaneous act of passion, was part of Zeus's carefully orchestrated scheme to provide a cause for war that would unite the Greek armies. Even the specific duration and intensity of the conflict were planned to achieve maximum population reduction while providing enough heroic material to inspire future generations. The war needed to be long enough to kill large numbers of warriors from both sides, but glorious enough to seem worthwhile to the participants, ensuring that heroes would choose to participate despite the obvious dangers. This divine perspective on the Trojan War revealed the Greek understanding that individual human lives, while meaningful on a personal level, were part of larger cosmic patterns that mortals could rarely perceive or understand. The heroes who fought and died at Troy were both genuine individuals making their own choices and unknowing participants in a divine plan that extended far beyond their personal motivations and goals. 77. Helen's oath and why all Greece went to war. The massive Greek expedition that sailed to Troy was not simply the result of injured pride or brotherly loyalty, but the fulfillment of a binding oath that had been carefully designed to prevent exactly the kind of conflict it ultimately caused, showing how legal safeguards can sometimes create the very problems they were meant to solve. When Helen came of age and her extraordinary beauty attracted suitors from across the Greek world, her father Tyndareus faced a diplomatic nightmare. Every major king and prince wanted to marry her, and rejecting their suits could lead to warfare between powerful city-states. The competition for Helen's hand threatened to destabilize the entire Greek political system. The solution came from Odysseus, who was also among the suitors but recognized that his chances were slim. In exchange for Tyndareus's help in winning Penelope's hand, Odysseus proposed a clever legal mechanism. All suitors would swear the oath of Tyndareus, promising to accept Helen's choice of husband and to defend that marriage against any future threats. This oath seemed like perfect insurance against future conflicts. If Helen chose freely among her suitors, and all the rejected parties had sworn to support her choice, then jealousy and resentment would be legally contained. The oath would prevent war by making all potential rivals into sworn protectors of Helen's marriage. But when Paris abducted Helen, whether through seduction or force, the oath's protective mechanism became a trap that ensured maximum conflict instead of preventing war. The legal requirement that all former suitors defend Helen's marriage meant that virtually every major Greek hero was bound by sacred oath to join the expedition against Troy. Men who might otherwise have avoided foreign adventure found themselves legally and religiously obligated to participate in what became the longest and bloodiest war in Greek legend, proving that even the most carefully crafted agreements can have unintended consequences that exceed their original purpose. 78. King Midas's second punishment. After learning his painful lesson about the curse of the golden touch, King Midas might have expected his troubles with divine justice to be over. But the gods had one more humiliation in store for the Phrygian king that would prove even more personally embarrassing than his previous misfortune. The second divine encounter occurred when Midas was invited to judge a musical competition between Apollo, god of music and poetry, and Pan, the rustic god of shepherds and wild places. This should have been an easy decision, since Apollo's lyre was renowned throughout the cosmos for producing the most beautiful melodies ever heard, while Pan's pipes, though charming, were clearly inferior in sophistication and divine power. But Midas, perhaps still resentful toward the Olympian gods after his experience with the golden touch, or simply tone-deaf to the subtleties of divine music, declared Pan the winner. This decision shocked both divine contestants and revealed either remarkable courage or stunning stupidity on the part of the mortal king. Apollo's punishment was swift and personal. Instead of striking Midas dead or cursing his kingdom, the god chose to transform the king's ears into those of a donkey, ensuring that his poor musical judgment would be permanently visible to all who saw him. The long, furry ears served as a constant reminder of his foolish decision and his inability to recognize true artistic excellence. Midas managed to hide his transformation by wearing a turban and swearing his barber to secrecy. But the burden of keeping such a humiliating secret proved too much for the man to bear. Unable to tell anyone about his discovery, the barber dug a hole in the ground and whispered the truth into the earth. But the reeds that grew from that spot carried his words on the wind, eventually spreading the story throughout the kingdom and beyond. This second punishment showed that the gods cared as much about artistic and intellectual judgment as they did about material greed. 79. Daedalus' grief that named seas and islands. The tragic death of Icarus left permanent marks on the geography of the ancient world, as the grief-stricken father Daedalus named landmarks after his lost son, creating a memorial that would ensure the young man's story would be remembered for as long as ships sailed the Aegean Sea. When Icarus fell from the sky after flying too close to the sun, his body crashed into the waters between Crete and Asia Minor, disappearing beneath the waves in sight of his horrified father. Daedalus, watching helplessly from above as his son's dreams of flight ended in death, named that stretch of water the Icarian Sea, transforming a site of personal tragedy into a permanent geographic memorial. The grief-stricken father continued his flight to the nearest island, where some versions of the myth say he was met by Heracles, who happened to be passing through the area during one of his labors. The hero helped Daedalus recover his son's body from the sea and gave the young man a proper burial, showing that even the mightiest heroes understood the importance of honoring the dead and comforting the bereaved. Daedalus named this island Icaria in memory of his son, ensuring that future travelers would remember the story of the boy who flew too high and the father who loved him enough to share his greatest invention despite its dangers. The island became a landmark for ancient navigators, who would tell the story of Icarus to their crews as both entertainment and warning about the perils of excessive ambition. In modern times, this ancient memorial gained new significance when a human-powered aircraft, Daedalus, successfully flew 74 miles from Crete to Santorini in 1988, proving that human flight was possible when undertaken with proper preparation and respect for natural limitations, thus finally fulfilling the dream that had cost Icarus his life while honoring the memory of mythology's first aviator. 80. Echo's complete loss of voice. The curse that befell the nymph Echo was far more comprehensive and devastating than the simple punishment of repeating others' words. It represented a complete loss of personal voice and autonomous expression that made her fate one of the most psychologically cruel in all mythology. Echo had originally been blessed with extraordinary eloquence and charm. Her voice so beautiful and persuasive that she could hold anyone's attention for hours with her stories, songs, and witty conversation. She used this gift in service to Zeus, entertaining Hera with long, engaging tales whenever the king of gods wanted to pursue his extramarital affairs without his wife's interference. But when Hera discovered this deception, her punishment was designed to corrupt Echo's greatest strength into her most painful weakness. The curse didn't simply force Echo to repeat others' words. It robbed her completely of the ability to speak her own thoughts, express her own feelings, or initiate any conversation whatsoever. This made Echo's love for Narcissus particularly tragic because she could never tell him directly how she felt. When he called out, "Is anyone there?" she could only repeat, "Anyone there?" When he said, "Come to me," she could joyfully echo, "Come to me," but she could never add her own words of love, explanation, or invitation. The psychological torment of being trapped in perpetual conversation without ever being able to express one's true self represented a form of living death, where consciousness remained intact, but communication became impossible. Echo could think and feel everything she had always experienced, but she could never share those inner experiences with another person. Her eventual transformation into pure sound, existing only as acoustic reflection without physical form, represented the logical conclusion of her curse, becoming literally what she had been forced to become metaphorically: a voice without agency, presence without personality, communication without genuine connection. 81. The primordial void of chaos. In the very beginning, before time had learned to flow or space had discovered dimension, there existed something that was neither something nor nothing, a divine paradox that the Greeks called chaos, the primordial void from which all existence would eventually emerge. Chaos was not the destructive confusion that modern language suggests, but rather a state of pure potential, a cosmic womb pregnant with infinite possibilities. Hesiod described it as a gaping chasm, a divine opening in the fabric of nothingness that somehow contained everything that would ever exist, waiting for the proper moment to give birth to reality itself. Picture not darkness, for darkness requires light to define it, not emptiness, for emptiness implies space to be empty, but rather a condition beyond human comprehension where all the fundamental forces that would govern existence lay dormant, unformed, and undifferentiated. This was the divine equivalent of a dreamless sleep, where consciousness existed but had not yet awakened to its own nature. From this cosmic void emerged the first conscious beings through processes that mortals could never fully understand. These weren't created beings fashioned by some external force, but aspects of existence that simply willed themselves into being through the inherent creative power contained within chaos itself. The emergence of Erebus, the personification of deep darkness, and Nyx, the goddess of night, represented the first differentiation within the void, the beginning of distinction and separation that would eventually lead to all the complexity of the created world. These primal forces brought forth Eros, not the mischievous Cupid of later tradition, but the fundamental force of attraction and love that would draw scattered elements together to form stars, planets, and eventually life itself. 82. The violent succession of divine rulers. The early history of divine kingship was marked by a cycle of horrific violence that revealed the Greek understanding that cosmic order could only emerge through conflict, revolution, and the willingness of each generation to overthrow the limitations of their predecessors. The pattern began with Uranus, the personification of the sky, who ruled through simple dominance and showed his tyrannical nature by imprisoning his own children deep within the earth. His reign represented raw, unorganized power that suppressed growth and change, making evolution impossible and keeping the cosmos locked in a primitive state. Cronus, Uranus Ungestion, ended this oppression through an act of shocking violence, castrating his father with a sickle provided by the suffering Earth Mother Gaia. This act of rebellion liberated not only Cronus' siblings, but the very principle of change itself, allowing time to begin flowing and development to occur within the cosmic order. But Cronus' rule, though an improvement over his father's tyranny, was marked by its own form of oppression, driven by paranoia about a prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him. Cronus devoured each of his offspring the moment they were born, keeping their divine power trapped within his own body where it could never challenge his authority. Zeus's victory over his father required not just personal courage, but cosmic necessity, representing the triumph of justice over paranoia, wisdom over fear, and growth over stagnation. His use of cunning rather than simple violence showed that the new order would be based on intelligence and cooperation rather than brute force alone. This pattern of violent succession was not seen as a flaw in the cosmic system, but as a necessary mechanism for ensuring that power never became completely static. That each generation of rulers would be tested and replaced when they could no longer serve the greater good of existence itself. 83. The Earth as a living, breathing disk. Ancient Greek cosmology envisioned the Earth not as a dead sphere floating in empty space, but as a living, breathing organism with its own consciousness, needs, and active participation in the ongoing drama of existence. The Earth was conceived as a vast flat disk floating on a waste of waters, encircled by the great river Oceanus that marked the boundary between the known world and the mysterious realms beyond mortal exploration. This wasn't primitive ignorance, but a sophisticated understanding that emphasized the Earth connection to the life-giving properties of water and the cyclical nature of all existence. Gaia, the Earth goddess, was not simply the soil beneath mortals' feet, but a conscious being whose thoughts and emotions directly affected the physical world. When she was pleased, the Earth produced abundant harvests, gentle weather, and all the conditions necessary for life to flourish. When she was angry or sorrowful, earthquakes would shake the foundations of mountains. Volcanoes would erupt with her fiery tears, and famines would remind mortals of their dependence on her goodwill. The Greeks believed they could literally feel Gaia's breathing through the rhythmic rise and fall of tides, the seasonal expansion and contraction of soil, and the daily warming and cooling cycles that marked the Earth's response to the sun's presence. Her heartbeat could be detected in the regular patterns of weather, migration, and growth that marked the passage of time. This living Earth concept meant that human actions had moral as well as practical consequences. Farmers who worked their land with respect and gratitude would receive Gaia's blessing in the form of fertile soil and good harvests, while those who exploited or damaged the earth would face her wrath through drought, soil exhaustion, and natural disasters that served as reminders of humanity's dependence on the natural world. 84. 5 sacred rivers with distinct powers. The underworld was not a simple destination, but a complex realm watered by 5 mystical rivers, each possessing supernatural properties that could transform the souls who encountered them, creating a divine hydraulic system that processed the dead according to their earthly deeds and spiritual needs. The most famous of these was the Styx, whose dark waters carried the power to bind oaths with unbreakable force. When gods swore by the Styx, they literally could not violate their promises without facing terrible consequences, making this river the foundation of trust and reliability in the divine realm. The goddess Styx herself, personification of the river, had sided with Zeus during the Titanomachy, earning her waters their special status as cosmic truth serum. Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, offered a different kind of transformation. Souls who drank from its waters would lose all memory of their previous lives, allowing them to be reborn without the burden of past mistakes or traumas. This river represented the mercy of fresh starts and second chances, ensuring that no soul would be permanently trapped by the errors of a single lifetime. Acheron, the river of woe and misery, carried the emotional pain and regret of the dead, serving as a cosmic drainage system that prevented the underworld from being overwhelmed by accumulated sorrow. Souls who needed to process grief, guilt, where lost would find themselves drawn to its banks, where they could safely experience and release their negative emotions. Phlegethon, the river of blazing fire, provided purification through symbolic burning, cleansing souls of spiritual impurities that prevented them from achieving peace. Its flames were not torture, but therapy, burning away only what needed to be destroyed while preserving what was valuable and eternal. Cocytus, the river of wailing and lamentation, allowed souls to express their deepest fears and regrets through sound, providing emotional release that words alone could never achieve. 85. The Styx as divine truth serum. Among all the rivers in both the mortal and divine realms, none possessed more power or commanded greater respect than the Styx, whose dark waters serve as the ultimate guarantee of truth and reliability in a cosmos where deception and broken promises could have catastrophic consequences. The river's special status originated during the Titanomachy, when the goddess Styx, personification of the river itself, chose to support Zeus and the Olympians against her fellow Titans. This act of loyalty during the cosmos' greatest crisis earned her waters a unique position in the divine order, making them the standard by which all future oaths would be measured. When a god needed to make a promise that others would absolutely believe, they would swear by the waters of the Styx, often accompanied by elaborate rituals that emphasized the seriousness of their commitment. Zeus himself used this method to settle disputes among the Olympians, since no deity would dare to violate such an oath regardless of personal consequences. The punishment for breaking a Styx oath was both immediate and severe. The offending deity would be rendered unconscious for exactly 1 year, followed by 9 additional years of banishment from divine society, during which they could not participate in the nectar and ambrosia that sustained divine life or attend the assemblies where cosmic decisions were made. This punishment was particularly effective because it attacked the social nature of divine existence. Gods derived much of their power and meaning from their relationships with other deities, and isolation from the divine community was almost worse than physical torture. The threat of such banishment ensured that Styx oaths were taken seriously and honored completely. The river's power extended beyond simple promise-keeping to become the foundation of cosmic law itself, proving that even gods needed external standards to govern their behavior and maintain trust within their community. 86. The underworld's 3-part judicial system. Death in the ancient Greek world was not the end of judgment, but the beginning of a complex legal process that determined each soul's eternal fate through a sophisticated 3-judge system that ensured fairness while reflecting the cultural values of justice and proper procedure. The 3 judges who presided over this cosmic court were all sons of Zeus who had established reputations for wisdom and justice during their mortal lives as kings. Minos, who had ruled Crete with legendary fairness, served as the chief judge with the final deciding vote in difficult cases. His experience in creating just laws for a complex maritime civilization made him particularly qualified to handle the intricate moral questions that dead souls presented. Rhadamanthus, known for his absolute honesty and inability to be bribed or influenced, judged the souls of those who had died in Asia, bringing his reputation for incorruptible integrity to bear on cases involving people from cultures with different moral standards. His role ensured that justice would be administered fairly regardless of the deceased's ethnic or cultural background. Aeacus, who had ruled the island of Aegina with such justice that even the gods consulted him on matters of law, judged European souls, bringing his experience with northern Greek customs and values to the judicial process. His involvement ensured that cultural context would be considered in determining appropriate punishments or rewards. The 3 judges would examine each soul's life, weighing good deeds against bad ones while considering the circumstances, motivations, and cultural context that influenced the person's choices. This wasn't a simple mathematical calculation, but a sophisticated moral evaluation that took into account the complexity of human existence and the various factors that shaped individual behavior. Cases where the judges disagreed would be decided by majority vote, with Minos casting the deciding ballot when necessary, ensuring that no soul would be condemned or rewarded without careful deliberation and cosmic due process. 87. Sisyphus and the absurdity of meaningless labor. The punishment of Sisyphus has become one of the most powerful symbols of meaningless struggle in world literature. But the original myth reveals layers of meaning about the nature of rebellion, cleverness, and the cosmic consequences of challenging the fundamental order of existence. Sisyphus was not simply a criminal, but a figure whose intelligence and cunning rivaled that of the gods themselves, making him both admirable and dangerous from the divine perspective. His crimes included violating the sacred laws of hospitality by killing guests in his palace. But his greatest offense was binding death himself when Thanatos came to claim him, temporarily disrupting the natural order by making mortality impossible. During the period when death was chained, no one could die regardless of their injuries or illnesses, creating a cosmic crisis that threatened to upset the balance between life and death that maintained universal stability. Warriors continued fighting with mortal wounds. Elderly people lingered in pain without release, and the underworld faced the unprecedented problem of no new arrivals. When Sisyphus was finally captured and brought before the judges of the dead, his punishment was designed to reflect the specific nature of his crimes. The boulder he must roll eternally up the mountain represents the weight of his defiance against cosmic law, while its inevitable rolling back down symbolizes the futility of trying to overcome forces greater than oneself. But the punishment also contains an element of hope that makes it particularly cruel. Each time Sisyphus begins his task, there's a moment when success seems possible, when the boulder moves smoothly up the slope and the summit appears within reach. This false hope, followed by inevitable disappointment, creates a psychological torture that purely physical pain could never achieve. Modern philosophers have found in Sisyphus's story a metaphor for the human condition itself, suggesting that meaning comes not from achieving final success, but from the dignity and determination with which we face inevitable struggles. 88. Tantalus and the agony of perpetual desire. The eternal punishment of Tantalus created our modern word tantalize. But the original myth reveals a sophisticated understanding of how desire, when corrupted by pride and impiety, can become its own form of hell that makes satisfaction impossible even when everything we want seems within reach. Tantalus had enjoyed a privileged position among mortals, dining with the gods and sharing their divine knowledge. But this extraordinary honor led him to commit an act so shocking that it redefined the boundaries of acceptable behavior. To test whether the gods were truly omniscient, he killed his own son Pelops and served the child's flesh to the divine guests at a banquet, treating the gods like ordinary mortals who could be deceived through clever presentation. The gods immediately recognized the horrible nature of the meal, with only Demeter, distracted by grief over Persephone's abduction, accidentally consuming a small portion before realizing what she was eating. They restored Pelops to life, replacing the missing shoulder with one made of ivory, and turned their full attention to punishing the father who had committed such an unthinkable crime. Tantalus's punishment in the underworld perfectly mirrored his crime by corrupting the act of nourishment itself. He stands eternally in a pool of clear water that recedes whenever he bends to drink, beneath fruit trees whose branches lift themselves away whenever he reaches for food. This ensures that he experiences constant hunger and thirst while being perpetually tantalized by the apparent possibility of satisfaction. The psychological sophistication of this punishment lies in its manipulation of hope and expectation. Tantalus never stops believing that the next attempt might succeed, that the water might not recede, that his hand might be quick enough to grasp the fruit. This eternal optimism, followed by inevitable disappointment, creates a mental torture that complements his physical suffering, showing how desire without satisfaction can become more painful than simple deprivation. 89. The underworld selective entry system. Death alone was not sufficient to guarantee entry into the underworld, as the Greeks believed that proper burial rites were essential for the soul's successful transition from the world of the living to the realm of the dead, creating a system where social obligations had cosmic consequences. The unburied dead were condemned to wander the shores of the underworld rivers for exactly 100 years, visible to both the living and the dead, but belonging fully to neither realm. These unfortunate souls could see their families and friends, could witness the passage of time and the changes in the world they had left behind, but could never communicate with the living or find peace among the dead. This belief made the denial of burial one of the cruelest punishments possible, worse than execution itself, because it condemned the victim to a century of conscious suffering followed by an uncertain fate. The practice also created powerful social obligations, since family members who failed to properly bury their dead would be responsible for condemning their loved ones to this terrible limbo. The burial requirements were not arbitrary religious customs, but reflected deeper truths about community responsibility and the connections between the living and dead. Proper burial showed that the deceased had been a valued member of society who deserved respect and remembrance, while also ensuring that their death would not disrupt the cosmic order through unresolved spiritual business. The necessity of burial rites also created opportunities for heroism and moral testing. Heroes like Antigone, who defied political authority to ensure her brother received proper burial, demonstrated that religious and family obligations sometimes took precedence over civil law, while showing that true heroism often involved personal sacrifice for the sake of cosmic justice. Even enemies in warfare were expected to observe burial truces, temporary ceasefires that allowed both sides to collect and properly inter their dead, proving that the obligation to honor the deceased transcended political and military conflicts. 90. Charon's obol and the economics of death. The ferry passage across the river Styx required payment to Charon, the ancient ferryman whose weathered hands had guided countless souls from life to death, creating one of history's most enduring examples of how economic relationships could extend even into the realm of the dead. The standard fee was 1 obol, a small silver coin worth roughly 1/6 of a drachma, placed in the mouth of the deceased before burial. This practice was so universal that it continued through Roman times and influenced funeral customs across the ancient Mediterranean, showing how practical concerns shaped religious beliefs and ritual practices. The word obol originally meant roasting spit, reflecting the coin's origin in an era when iron spits were used as currency before the invention of metal coinage. This linguistic connection revealed the ancient Greek understanding that value and exchange were fundamental aspects of existence that transcended the boundary between life and death. Charon himself was a figure of great antiquity, described as an old man whose white hair and beard showed his age, while his strong arms demonstrated his eternal capacity for the physical labor of rowing souls across the dark waters. His fee was not arbitrary greed, but payment for services rendered, showing that even divine beings operated within economic systems that required fair exchange. Souls who could not pay the ferry toll faced the grim prospect of waiting on the shores of the Styx for 100 years, watching other souls cross to their final rest while they remained trapped in an intermediate state between life and death. This created powerful incentives for proper funeral preparation and showed how economic inequality could extend beyond life into the afterlife itself. The practice also revealed Greek beliefs about personal responsibility and family obligation, since providing the obol was typically the responsibility of surviving relatives who needed to ensure their loved ones could complete the journey to the afterlife successfully. 91. The Pythia's geological trance state. The oracle at Delphi, perched high on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, was more than a religious center. It was a place where geology and spirituality intersected to create one of the ancient world's most mysterious and influential institutions, where divine prophecy may have had a literal scientific foundation. The Pythia, Apollo's chosen priestess, would descend into the inner sanctum of the temple and seat herself on a golden tripod positioned directly over a fissure in the earth. Ancient writers described how she would breathe vapors rising from this crack in the ground, entering a trance state that allowed Apollo to speak through her voice, delivering prophecies that would influence the fate of individuals and entire civilizations. For centuries, scholars dismissed these accounts as religious superstition. But modern geological analysis has revealed something extraordinary. The temple at Delphi sits directly over intersecting fault lines that release gases from deep within the Earth's crust, including ethylene, methane, and hydrogen sulfide, compounds that can cause euphoric hallucinations, altered states of consciousness, and the exact type of behavior described in ancient sources. The specific combination of gases at Delphi appears to have been particularly conducive to inducing prophetic trances. Ethylene, in particular, was used as an anesthetic in the early 20th century and is known to cause feelings of euphoria, dissociation from physical reality, and heightened perception, all effects that would have been interpreted as divine possession in the ancient world. The Pythia's preparation ritual, which included fasting, purification with sacred spring water, and chewing laurel leaves, would have made her even more susceptible to the effects of these natural psychoactive compounds, creating ideal conditions for the altered states of consciousness that made her prophecies possible. This doesn't diminish the spiritual significance of the oracle's pronouncements, but it does suggest that the ancient Greeks may have unknowingly discovered one of the world's first natural pharmacological aids to religious experience. 92. Dodona's talking oak trees. In the mountainous region of Epirus, far from the sophisticated temples and elaborate rituals of the major cities, Zeus operated his oldest and most rustic oracle through the whispered messages of sacred oak trees, creating a form of prophecy that emphasized harmony with nature over human interpretation. The oracle of Dodona was considered the most ancient in all of Greece, predating even the famous shrine at Delphi by centuries, and its methods reflected a more primitive but perhaps more direct connection to divine will. The priests, called Selwa, lived simple lives without shoes or fancy robes, sleeping on the ground and keeping themselves in close contact with the earth they served. The prophetic process at Dodona involved multiple natural elements working together to convey divine messages. The sacred oak grove, which the Greeks believed was the first place where Zeus had spoken to mortals, would rustle its leaves in patterns that the priests interpreted as divine communication. The sound of wind through the branches was thought to carry Zeus's voice, making every breeze a potential message from the king of gods. A sacred spring that bubbled up near the base of the greatest oak tree provided another channel for divine communication, its gurgles and splashes adding rhythm and melody to the whispered messages of the leaves. The priests would listen carefully to the interplay between wind and water, finding meaning in the complex harmonies that nature created. Perhaps most dramatically, a bronze gong hung among the oak branches would occasionally be struck by the wind or by birds, creating resonant tones that punctuated the more subtle messages of rustling leaves and flowing water. These bronze notes were considered particularly important, often marking the climax or confirmation of a prophetic session. This natural approach to prophecy reflected Greek beliefs about the fundamental connection between divine will and natural processes, suggesting that the gods preferred to communicate through the beauty and harmony of the world they had created rather than through elaborate human ceremonies. 93. The soul as departing breath. Greek beliefs about death and the afterlife were remarkably concrete and physical, with the soul understood not as an abstract spiritual essence, but as something material that could be literally seen, felt, or heard leaving the body at the moment of death. The word psyche, which we translate as soul, originally meant breath or life force, reflecting the Greek observation that breathing was the most obvious difference between living and dead bodies. When someone died, witnesses expected to see, feel, or hear the soul departing as a small puff of breath or wind, making death a visible as well as emotional event. This wasn't metaphorical language, but literal expectation. Family members and friends would gather around deathbeds specifically to witness the soul's departure, often opening windows or doors to provide a clear path for the psyche to escape the body and begin its journey to the underworld. Some accounts describe the soul as briefly visible as a small, shadowy figure that would hover near the body before disappearing. The connection between breath and soul explained many aspects of Greek funeral practices. The custom of closing the eyes and mouth of the dead served partly to prevent the soul from returning to the body, while the practice of wailing and calling the deceased's name was meant to help guide the departed soul toward its proper destination rather than leaving it confused and lost. This physical understanding of the soul also influenced beliefs about ghosts and supernatural encounters. Spirits who appeared to the living were thought to be souls that had somehow retained enough of their material essence to interact with the physical world, either because they had unfinished business or because they had been improperly buried and could not complete their journey to the afterlife. The Greeks' concrete approach to death made the afterlife seem less mysterious and more like a natural continuation of existence in a different form, helping to reduce the fear and uncertainty that might otherwise have made death unbearable to contemplate. 94. Elysium's selective paradise. The blessed realm known as Elysium or the Elysian Fields was not originally a reward for moral behavior, but an exclusive paradise reserved for heroes, demigods, and mortals who had earned divine favor through extraordinary achievements, regardless of their ethical conduct during life. This divine retirement community was located at the western edge of the world, beyond the great river Oceanus that encircled the earth, in a land where eternal spring prevailed and the problems of mortal existence simply did not exist. There was no disease, no afin, no scarcity of food or other necessities, and no conflicts between residents who had transcended the petty concerns that troubled ordinary mortals. The criteria for admission to Elysium were based on greatness rather than goodness, meaning that legendary kings, famous warriors, and accomplished heroes could gain entry even if their earthly lives had included morally questionable actions. Achilles, despite his pride and violent temper, earned his place through his martial excellence, while Menelaus gained admission primarily because he was married to Helen and thus connected to divine plans. Some residents of Elysium were given the option of reincarnation, allowing them to return to mortal life if they grew bored with paradise or wanted to attempt even greater achievements. However, souls who were reborn and achieved heroic status 3 times could choose to remain permanently in Elysium, suggesting that ultimate paradise required not just initial greatness, but sustained excellence across multiple lifetimes. Only later in Greek religious development did Elysium become associated with moral virtue and ethical behavior, as philosophers began to argue that true greatness required goodness and that paradise should be available to anyone who lived a righteous life regardless of their fame or social status, showing how religious concepts evolved to reflect changing cultural values. 95. Tartarus as cosmic prison. Tartarus was not simply the deepest part of the underworld, but a conscious entity whose very existence served as both punishment and cosmic necessity, representing the principle that some crimes required consequences that transcended ordinary justice and became part of the fundamental structure of reality. The realm lay so far beneath the ordinary underworld that Homer described it taking 9 full days for a bronze anvil to fall from the surface of the earth to its lowest depths, making it literally the bottom of existence. the final destination for those whose crimes had violated the most basic principles that held the cosmos together. The walls of Tartarus were made of bronze that gleamed dully in the eternal twilight, their surfaces inscribed with the names and descriptions of every crime that had ever been committed against divine law, creating a cosmic record that preserved the memory of evil while serving as a warning to future generations about the consequences of defying fundamental moral principles. The gates were guarded by the Hecatonchires, hundred-handed giants whose strength could crush mountains and whose loyalty to Zeus had been earned during the Titanomachy, ensuring that none who entered could ever escape through force, cunning, or persuasion, making Tartarus the one prison that truly deserved the description inescapable. But Tartarus was more than just a place of punishment. It served as the cosmic balance point where abstract concepts like justice, necessity, and consequence took physical form, proving that the universe operated according to moral as well as physical laws, and that actions had consequences that could literally reshape reality. The deity Tartarus felt every footstep of every prisoner in his realm, experienced their suffering as his own thoughts, and grew stronger with each act of cosmic justice carried out within his boundaries, showing that punishment served not just individual correction but universal order, maintaining the stability that allowed existence itself to continue. 95. Niobe's visible tragedy. High on the rocky slopes of Mount Sipylus in ancient Lydia, there stood a limestone formation that local people claimed was the petrified form of Queen Niobe, forever weeping for the children she had lost through her own prideful boasting. Niobe had been blessed with 14 beautiful children, 7 sons and 7 daughters who were the pride of Thebes. But her maternal joy transformed into fatal hubris when she declared herself superior to the goddess Leto, who had given birth to only 2 children. Why should I worship a goddess who has so few offspring? Niobe proclaimed during a festival, when I have given birth to 7 times as many. These words reached the ears of Apollo and Artemis, Letos divine twins, who could not allow such an insult to their mother to go unpunished. The siblings descended from Olympus with silver bows drawn, their arrows never missing their marks. One by one, they systematically killed all 14 of Niobe's children, the sons falling in the gymnasium where they practiced athletics, the daughters dying in their mother's arms. Niobe's grief was so overwhelming that Zeus took pity on her, transforming her into stone so she would no longer feel the agony of loss. But even in stone, she could not stop weeping, and her tears became a spring that flowed from the mountainside. Local guides in ancient times would point to the rock formation, claiming they could still see the outline of a woman's face, forever frozen in eternal sorrow. 96. The sacred number 7 in Greek myths. Throughout the tapestry of Greek mythology, the number 7 appears with such frequency and significance that it reveals the ancient understanding of cosmic harmony and divine perfection, representing completeness and the natural order that governed both earthly and celestial realms. 7 was embedded in the very structure of the most important myths. Niobe bore 7 sons and 7 daughters, their perfect symmetry reflecting the balance between masculine and feminine principles. The great city of Thebes was protected by 7 mighty gates, each one guarded by a hero whose strength represented one aspect of divine protection. Apollo's sacred lyre originally had 7 strings, each one tuned to a different note in the divine scale that could harmonize with the music of the spheres. When mortals learned to play this instrument, they were essentially learning to participate in the cosmic symphony that ordered all existence. The number's power extended beyond individual myths to cosmic cycles. 7 days marked the phases of the moon. 7 stars formed the constellation of the Pleiades. And 7 was considered the age of reason, when children could first understand the difference between right and wrong. This sacred number traced its origins back to ancient Mesopotamian astronomy, where 7 wandering stars, the visible planets, moved against the backdrop of fixed constellations. The The Greeks inherited this reverence and wove it into their stories, making 7 a bridge between earthly experience and divine truth, a number that connected human life to the greater patterns that govern the universe. 97. Greek myths explained real geographical features. The ancient Greeks possessed an insatiable curiosity about the natural world around them, and their myths served as both entertainment and explanation for the remarkable geographical features that dotted their landscape, turning every mountain, river, and unusual rock formation into a chapter in the ongoing story of divine interaction with the mortal world. The Icarian Sea, that stretch of water between the Greek islands and the coast of Asia Minor, bore the name of the boy who flew too close to the sun, when Icarus's wax wings melted and he plummeted into the waves. The grief-stricken Daedalus named both the sea and the nearby island of Icaria after his fallen son, ensuring that the tragedy would be remembered for all time. In Lydia, the river Pactolus gleamed with gold because King Midas had washed the cursed golden touch from his hands in its waters, leaving behind flakes of precious metal that prospectors would pan for centuries. The real river did contain gold deposits, making the myth a poetic explanation for geological fact. Mount Sipylus displayed the weeping rock formation that locals identified as Niobe, while the Strait of Messina between Italy and Sicily was explained by the myth of Scylla and Charybdis, 2 monsters who created the dangerous whirlpools and currents that made navigation treacherous. These mythological explanations satisfied both intellectual curiosity and emotional need, giving human meaning to natural phenomena while preserving geographical knowledge in memorable stories that could be passed down through generations of oral tradition. 98. Divine transformations preserved original abilities. When the gods punished mortals through magical transformation, they revealed a sophisticated understanding of justice that went beyond simple cruelty, instead creating punishments that preserved the victim's essential nature while twisting it into a form that served as eternal reminder of their transgression. Arachne's transformation into a spider perfectly exemplified this divine logic. The young woman's crime had been hubris, challenging Athena to a weaving contest and creating a tapestry that depicted the gods' cruelest acts. But Athena recognized that Arachne's skill was genuine, even if her judgment was flawed. So when the goddess transformed her, she preserved Arachne's weaving ability, allowing her to continue creating intricate patterns and beautiful designs. But now as a spider whose webs would be destroyed by every passing breeze and careless footstep. Echo's punishment followed similar principles. Her crime was using her voice to distract Hera while Zeus pursued his affairs. So Hera cursed her to lose original speech while retaining her vocal ability. Echo could still make beautiful sounds, but only by repeating the words of others, making her both a perfect musician and a tragic figure who could never express her own thoughts. Narcissus became a flower that perpetually leaned toward its reflection in water, preserving his beauty and self-obsession in botanical form. These transformations demonstrated that divine justice sought to educate rather than simply destroy, creating living lessons that would remind future generations about the consequences of pride, deception, and excessive self-love. 99. Women as creators and destroyers. Throughout Greek mythology, female characters wielded tremendous power that encompassed both creation and destruction, embodying the ancient understanding that the forces which give life are also capable of taking it away, and that wisdom often lay in respecting rather than trying to control these fundamental energies. Pandora represented this duality in its purest form. Her curiosity unleashed all the evils that would plague humanity: disease, famine, despair, making her the apparent source of all human suffering. Yet she also preserved hope within the jar, ensuring that mortals would never fall into complete despair. Her story revealed that the same impulse that brought disaster also provided salvation, That creation and destruction were two faces of the same cosmic principle. Persephone ruled both the flowering earth of spring and the shadowy realm of the dead, bringing life to the world during her time above ground and governing the mysterious processes of death and rebirth during her months in the underworld. Her dual nature made her one of the most powerful deities in the pantheon, feared by mortals for her connection to death, yet beloved for her role in agriculture and renewal. Athena could create the olive tree that would feed and sustain civilization, but she could also destroy through warfare and strategic planning. Aphrodite brought love that created families and inspired art, but also caused the Trojan War through her role in the Judgment of Paris. These examples demonstrated that Greek mythology recognized feminine power as fundamental to cosmic order, neither purely beneficent nor purely destructive, but essential to the ongoing process of life, death, and renewal that kept the universe functioning. 100. The enduring psychology of Greek myths. The stories that emerged from ancient Greece continue to captivate modern audiences, not because of their exotic supernatural elements, but because they explore psychological truths that remain as relevant today as they were 3,000 years ago, revealing fundamental aspects of human nature that transcend cultural and temporal boundaries. Pandora's myth speaks to the eternal tension between curiosity and security, the human drive to explore and discover even when we suspect that knowledge might bring pain. Her story resonates in our modern world where scientific advancement and technological progress offer both promise and peril, where each new discovery opens doors that can never be closed again. The tragedy of Icarus addresses the universal challenge of balancing ambition with wisdom, the difficulty of knowing when confidence becomes dangerous overreach. Every generation faces this dilemma, whether in personal relationships, professional advancement, or societal progress. Orpheus and Eurydice explore the nature of love and loss, the question of whether true devotion means accepting death as final or fighting against it even when the battle seems hopeless. Their story asks whether looking back in doubt is a sign of insufficient love or very human uncertainty. Narcissus and Echo examine different forms of failed communication and connection, the tragedy of self-obsession and the equal tragedy of losing one's authentic voice in relationships. These psychological patterns continue to play out in modern relationships, social media interactions, and personal development. The enduring power of these myths lies in their ability to illuminate eternal human experiences through compelling narratives that make abstract psychological concepts concrete and memorable. 101. The primordial void of chaos. In the very beginning, before the first star ignited or the first planet found its orbit, before time itself learned to flow in ordered sequence, there existed only chaos, a divine emptiness so vast and profound that mortal minds could barely comprehend its nature. But chaos was not the violent disorder that modern language suggests. The ancient Greeks understood it as something far more mysterious and meaningful, a primordial void that contained infinite potential, a cosmic womb pregnant with all possibilities yet manifesting none of them. Picture not darkness, for darkness requires light to define it, nor silence, for silence needs sound to give it meaning, but rather a state of pure potentiality where every conceivable reality waited to be born. Hesiod described this first principle as a gaping chasm, a divine opening in the fabric of nothingness itself that served as the gateway between non-existence and existence. From this vast emptiness, the first conscious beings began to emerge through forces that defied mortal understanding, not created by any external power, but willing themselves into reality through the sheer force of their own divine nature. From chaos came Erebus, the personification of deep darkness that would one day fill the spaces between stars, and Nyx, the goddess of night whose black wings would spread across the heavens to bring rest and dreams to weary mortals. Most remarkably, chaos also gave birth to Eros. Not the mischievous Cupid of later stories, but the fundamental force of attraction that would drive all future creation. 102. The violent succession of divine rulers. The history of divine rule in Greek cosmology was written in blood and betrayal, with each generation of gods achieving power through acts of violence, so shocking that they established a pattern of cosmic succession based on fear, brutality, and the terrible knowledge that every ruler would eventually face the same fate they had inflicted on their predecessor. The cycle began when Uranus, the star-spangled sky, became so paranoid about being overthrown that he refused to allow his children to be born, instead forcing them back into Gaia's womb each time they tried to emerge. The Earth Mother's pain and frustration finally drove her to desperate action, and she convinced her youngest son Cronus to castrate his father with a sickle made from her own adamantine essence. When Cronus achieved power, he learned of a prophecy that one of his own children would overthrow him, leading to his horrific practice of devouring each newborn baby before it could pose a threat. His wife Rhea endured the agony of watching her children disappear into their father's maw until Zeus was born, whom she saved through clever deception. Zeus's victory over Cronus in the 10-year Titanomachy established the pattern once and for all. Divine power could only be claimed through violence, maintained through vigilance, and would inevitably be lost through the same brutal methods used to obtain it. This cycle of violent succession reflected the Greek understanding that cosmic order was not a peaceful state, but a dynamic tension between competing forces, with each new generation bringing different values and priorities to the eternal challenge of governing the universe. 103. The Earth as a living, breathing disk. To the ancient Greeks, the world was not a sphere spinning through empty space, but a living, breathing disk that floated like an island on the infinite waters of Oceanus, possessed of its own consciousness and capable of physical and emotional responses to the events that unfolded upon its surface. Gaia, the Earth Mother, was not merely the ground beneath their feet, but a sentient being whose body formed the landscape they inhabited. Her bones were the mountains. Her blood was the rivers and underground streams. Her hair was the forests and grasslands that clothed her surface. When she sighed in her sleep, mortals felt it as gentle breezes. When she stirred restlessly, they experienced earthquakes that could topple cities. The flat disk of Earth was encircled by the great river Oceanus, whose flowing waters marked the boundary between the known world and the mysterious realms that lay beyond mortal exploration. This cosmic river was not simply H2O, but a divine entity whose currents carried the sun and moon across the sky, whose depths harbored creatures and islands that existed at the edge of reality itself. Above the Earth stretched the solid dome of the sky, supported by the 4 Titan pillars of the cardinal directions and studded with stars that were either divine beings or holes in the celestial sphere through which the light of heaven shone. Below the earth lay the shadowy realm of Hades, mirror image of the world above, but populated by the spirits of the dead. This cosmological model made the earth feel like home, a contained, comprehensible space where gods and mortals could interact, where every geographical feature had personality and meaning. 104. 5 sacred rivers with distinct powers. In the shadowy realm beneath the earth, where the spirits of the dead journeyed to their final destinations, 5 mystical rivers flowed with waters that possessed supernatural properties, each one serving a specific function in the cosmic process of death, judgment, and transformation that awaited every mortal soul. The most famous was the Styx, whose black waters carried the power to bind even the gods themselves with unbreakable oaths. When Zeus wanted to settle a dispute among the Olympians, he would send Iris, the rainbow goddess, to fetch a golden pitcher of Styx water. Any deity who swore by this river and then broke their word would fall into a death-like coma for 1 full year, followed by 9 years of banishment from divine society. Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, offered a different kind of transformation. Souls who drank from its silver waters would lose all memory of their mortal lives, allowing them to be reborn without the burden of past experiences. This forgetting was sometimes a mercy, particularly for those who had suffered greatly, but it also meant losing all the love and wisdom they had accumulated. Acheron, the river of woe, carried the tears of every mortal who had ever grieved. Its waters dark with accumulated sorrow. Phlegethon blazed with divine fire, its banks lined with flames that purified souls through controlled burning. Finally, Cocytus, the river of wailing, echoed with the cries of those who had died before their time, its mournful currents providing a voice for unfinished lives. These rivers transformed the underworld from a simple destination into a complex spiritual landscape, where death became a process of transformation rather than mere ending. 105. The Styx as divine truth serum. Among all the supernatural waters that flowed through the realms of gods and mortals, none commanded more respect or wielded more power than the river Styx, whose dark currents carried the authority to bind even Zeus himself with oaths so sacred that breaking them brought consequences more terrible than death itself. The river's power originated from its unique position in the cosmic order. Styx was not merely a body of water, but the goddess who personified the boundary between truth and falsehood, honor and betrayal, cosmic order and chaos. During the Titanomachy, when the universe was torn apart by divine civil war, Styx had been the first of the ancient powers to side with Zeus, bringing her children, Nike victory, Kratos strength, Zealous zeal, and Bia force to serve the future king of the gods. In gratitude for her early loyalty, Zeus granted Styx an honor unprecedented in divine history. Her waters would serve as the ultimate test of divine truthfulness. When gods swore by the Styx, they were essentially submitting themselves to cosmic justice, placing their divine nature itself as collateral for their promises. The oath-taking ceremony was elaborate and terrifying. Iris, the rainbow messenger, would descend to the deepest parts of the underworld with a golden pitcher, drawing water from the spring where Styx originated in the depths of Tartarus. The deity making the oath would pour a libation of this water while speaking their promise, knowing that the liquid carried the power to detect deception and punish falsehood. A god who broke a Styx-sworn oath faced punishment so severe that it transcended normal divine experience, complete unconsciousness for 1 full year, followed by 9 years of exile from ambrosia, nectar, and all divine society, essentially experiencing a form of temporary mortality that reminded them of their dependence on cosmic order.